Chapter 119. The sword pavilion was fully open. Chu Mu's group of 6 immediately headed to the sword pavilion. The sword pavilion elder was guarding this place as usual. When he saw Chu Mu and the others, especially when he saw Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng, his eyes lit up and shot out an extremely sharp glint. A shocked expression flashed across his face. Without stopping them, the sword pavilion elder immediately let Chu Mu's group of 6 into the sword pavilion. He didn't light any incense either, because the sect master Luo Tianxiong had already sent someone to inform him beforehand. I really didn't expect Chu Mu's cultivation to improve so quickly. The sword pavilion elder stared at the entrance of the sword pavilion and muttered to himself. He sighed with emotion. He's not even 17 years old this year, but he's already at the 10th stage of the sword chi realm at the age of 16. Coupled with his unfathomable attainments in swordsmanship, his strength is unimaginable. Oh, right, I wonder if he has comprehended sword force? And Xiao Qianfeng, his sharpness is extremely threatening. Ordinary swordsmen can't compare to him. Our Qingfeng sword sect is really lucky to have 2 such disciples. After Chu Mu's group of 6 entered the sword pavilion, they quickly spread out. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng entered the left sword pavilion, while Li Yi's group of 4 entered the right sword pavilion. The sword chi arts that Li Yi's group of 4 cultivated were only of the yellow class. Thus, they took this opportunity to choose a yellow class superior sword chi art each. As for Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng, Chu Mu had just changed to the origin sword chi art, which was of the yellow class. Xiao Qianfeng had obtained the endless sword Dao inheritance, so the sword chi art he cultivated wasn't of a low grade either. Thus, he didn't need it. After splitting up, Chu Mu directly entered the 3rd floor of the left sword pavilion. What made Chu Mu feel regretful was that the 3rd floor of the left sword pavilion contained very few swordsmanships, and there wasn't even a single secret technique. The swordsmanships on the 3rd floor were all of the superior sword arts. There were a total of 6 of them. 1 was of the fire element, 1 was of the thunder element, 1 was of the water element, 2 were of the cloud element, and 1 was of the metal element. Chu Mu looked through them one by one and felt even more regretful. The 6 advanced sword techniques were actually incomplete, which meant that they were missing the last advanced killer move. The headmaster, and the elders should have complete high-level swordsmanship. It seems that their swordsmanship is not recorded here. Chu Mu thought to himself and began to choose. He gave up on the fire, thunder, and water sword arts because of the metal edge sword art. In the end, he made a choice between the 2 cloud sword arts. One of them was the cloud sea swordsmanship, which was the swordsmanship that Li Yi practiced. It seemed that Li Yi had contributed it. The other one was called the cloud-shattering swordsmanship, which was completely different from the cloud sea swordsmanship. Chu Mu didn't hesitate and chose the 2 cloud series sword techniques. Xiao Qianfeng, on the other hand, chose the incomplete metal attribute sword technique. They immediately left together. Li Yi and the others also had their own gains. They walked out of the right sword pavilion and entered the left sword pavilion. Not long after, Wang Tingo chose the incomplete lightning attribute sword technique. As for Li Yi, Chu Mu chose the 2 cloud series sword techniques. He could only wait for Chu Mu to finish reading them before passing them to him. As for Yuan Wenhua, he could only wait for Xiao Qianfeng to pass the incomplete swordsmanship to him. The current sword pavilion was fully open to the 6 of them. Therefore, they could enter and choose at any time. This time, after registering their gains, they returned to the elite disciple area together. To them, such a harvest was more than enough. The sound of the air being torn apart was so sharp that it made one's scalp numb. Rays of faint golden sword light shot out like auroras and tore through the darkness before dawn. The dew was heavy and the sky was still slightly dark. The grass and trees around the elite disciples' sword training platform were condensed with a thick layer of frost, releasing an astonishing chill. If it were an ordinary person, they would definitely wrap the thick quilt tightly and continue to hide in the warm quilt to sleep. However, Chu Mu had already come to the sword training platform to practice his swordsmanship. The 13 styles of the Golden Blade, each style was so fierce, and each style was filled with an intense and shocking sharpness. This was a complete high-level swordsmanship obtained from the Green Orchid Virtual Realm. It was now the swordsmanship that Chu Mu focused on cultivating. 2 months had passed since he left the Green Orchid Virtual Realm. Chu Mu finally practiced the 13 basic styles of this swordsmanship to the level of Deshang. It was indeed the metal elemental swordsmanship that was famous for its sharpness. Each style was so fierce and so sharp. When it was performed, Chu Mu always felt that the air was being torn apart as if there was a material object. This feeling was different from the elegance and speed of the wind elemental swordsmanship. It was also different from the randomness of the cloud elemental swordsmanship. It was a kind of pure sharpness that pursued a little or a line of destruction, as if it was condensed to the extreme. During these 2 months, Chu Mu also had the opportunity to observe the incomplete metal elemental high-level swordsmanship that Xiao Qianfeng had chosen. He suddenly realized that the power of the incomplete metal elemental high-level swordsmanship was much weaker than the Golden Blade swordsmanship. It was not the difference in the final style. In the basic style, there was already a clear gap. In comparison, the Golden Blade swordsmanship focused more on the characteristics of the metal elemental swordsmanship. It fully displayed the sharpness of the metal elemental swordsmanship and was more inclined to a line of destruction. Chu Mu was the only one on the swordsmanship platform. The pseudo-clear wind sword in his hand was unbelievably swift and fierce. Every slash of the sword seemed to be able to cut through the hardest thing in the world. When the final slash was made, the faint golden luster seemed to condense into one in an instant. The slash tore through the darkness as if it had pierced through the void, leaving a thin and straight faint golden mark in the air. He withdrew his sword and stood there. After closing his eyes to regulate his breathing, he opened his eyes and exhaled a breath of white air that shot out like a sword. It shot out more than 2 meters before dissipating. Chu Mu's eyes were abnormally bright, making it impossible for others to look directly at him. The 13 basic styles of the Golden Blade swordsmanship have already become Deshang's. As for the final high-level killing move, after half a month of hard work, it can also become Deshang's now. Xiao Chen muttered to himself. His tone contained a shocking sharpness. Now show me your sharpness. Let me see your might. The various essences of the killing move, space-splitting golden blade, flowed through Chu Mu's mind. His hands started to move as well. The sword qi in his body started to surge, spreading to his arms and moving towards the pseudo-clear wind sword. With the Deshang's basic style as a foundation, in addition to Chu Mu's extremely strong comprehension ability and the many times he had used it in the past half a month, he did not meet with any obstacles in his cultivation. A strange feeling arose in his heart. Subconsciously, Chu Mu infused the incomplete state of metal that he had comprehended earlier into the pseudo-clear wind sword. Faint golden threads actually appeared on the pseudo-clear wind sword. They quickly swam around, each thread releasing a threatening sharpness. Space-splitting golden blade. A voice that was filled with sharpness resounded in his heart. It seemed to pierce through the void as Chu Mu slashed out with his sword. This slash was not fast or slow. It looked ordinary, but the faint golden threads on it instantly condensed into one, turning into a thin, faint golden thread. It seemed to cut through the void and disappeared. In the air, there was a strange sharpness and sharpness. Chu Mu maintained his posture of slashing out with his sword. The sharpness in his eyes was unstoppable. 15 meters away, a neat crack suddenly appeared in a boulder that was as tall as a person. It slowly slid forward and fell to the ground with a loud bang. The fracture of this huge rock was as smooth as a polished mirror. There was a trace of coldness and sharpness. Suddenly, Chu Mu felt that his consciousness seemed to have undergone some changes. In an instant, various essences of the metal attribute appeared, giving rise to waves of comprehension. He had actually comprehended 10% of the state of metal after mastering the killing move, space-splitting golden blade of the golden blade swordsmanship. I recommend a friend's book, Supreme Star Soul, for everyone to take a look. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 120. He casually stabbed out with his sword, and a faint golden light condensed into a golden needle, piercing through the void and shooting straight out, leaving a trace in the air that did not dissipate for a long time. With a clanging sound, he sheathed his sword. Only then did the light in Chu Mu's pupils slowly recede. His eyes became clear and calm. He leapt up and landed next to the broken boulder, carefully examining the fracture. He also stretched out a finger and gently slid it over the smooth surface of the fracture. He could vaguely feel a trace of amazing sharpness remaining in it. The power of the 13 styles of Golden Blade is more condensed than the general high-level gold swordsmanship. Its cutting power is also more powerful. The power of the killing move, the sky-splitting Golden Blade, is also very terrifying. Once it is used, it is difficult to detect it as if it is immersed in the void. If it is integrated with the gold essence, its power will be increased a lot. Withdrawing his finger, Chu Mu's eyes became deep. He secretly said, "Now the sky-splitting Golden Blade can be my strongest killing move under the simplified version of the wind form. It is not easy to practice the Golden Blade swordsmanship to perfection. In the future, the focus of cultivation will have to be changed. I will focus on the cloud swordsmanship and the dual swordsmanship with other swordsmanship as auxiliary. I can't fall behind in the cultivation of sword aura." Thinking of the cultivation of sword aura, Chu Mu naturally associated it with his cultivation talent. He could not help but smile. He had already done the test. His cultivation talent was now at level 7. In other words, after eating the holy fruit of Qinglan and grinding the horn of the dead wood horn python, his cultivation talent had soared from level 9 to level 7. Level 7 cultivation talent was indeed far better than level 9 cultivation talent. According to Chu Mu's cultivation efficiency in the past 2 months and the previous situation, he got a rough figure, 4 times. That's right. The cultivation speed of a level 8 talent was twice as fast as that of a level 9 talent. Similarly, the cultivation speed of a level 7 talent was twice as fast as that of a level 8 talent, which was 4 times as fast as that of a level 9 talent. This meant that the effect of cultivating 1 cycle with a 7th grade talent was equivalent to cultivating 4 cycles with a 9th grade talent. The number of Great Zhou days that Chu Mu could carry was more than 3 times that of an ordinary swordsman. Under normal circumstances, a 10th phase sword practitioner could carry 10 great circulations, but Chu Mu could carry 33 great circulations. Thus, in a short 2 months, his sword chi cultivation had neared the middle stage of the 10th phase. This kind of cultivation speed completely surpassed Li Yi and the rest. In addition, because Chu Mu was using inferior spirit stones to cultivate, his Shangyuan sword chi technique had already reached the peak of the 6th level. He was just 1 step away from breaking through to the 7th level. At that time, he would be able to condense the Xiantian sword chi that he had always dreamed of. Chu Mu, who had witnessed the power of Xiantian sword chi, was envious of it. When he thought about how he would soon be able to grasp Xiantian sword chi, he couldn't help feeling excited. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days had passed. Chu Mu held inferior spirit stones to cultivate his sword chi technique every day. Then he would go to the sword training platform to practice various swordsmanship. Occasionally, he would spar with Li Yi and the rest. He even used the entry-level dual swordsmanship to fight against Li Yi, Yuan Hua, Wang Tingo, and Xie Chunlei. He completely had the upper hand. The entry-level dual swordsmanship would not limit one's strength, nor would it increase one's strength. Only when one reached the minor mastery would it increase one's strength by at least 30%. However, because he lacked the essence of it, Chu Mu was still unable to reach the minor mastery. Even so, the entry level was enough to make Li Yi and the rest gasp in amazement. Out of curiosity, they all gave it a try. They used the dual swordsmanship with both hands, but the result was that they were restrained. Not to mention using the swordsmanship, it was difficult for them to even make the usual smooth movements. It felt awkward, and they almost hurt themselves when they sped up. They were only giving it a try. The focus was still on the swordsmanship that they were cultivating. They did not dare to expect too much. On the 11th day, Chu Mu woke up early as usual. At this time, the winter had begun to pass. The weather was not that cold, but it still made people feel a little cold. And today, for Chu Mu, was a meaningful day. It was the 17th year since his body was born in this world. In other words, today was Chu Mu's 17th birthday. Such a day, other than himself, perhaps only Chu Xingyun and his wife would remember. Perhaps they were hoping that he could appear in front of them and make them happy. But this was just a thought. Exhaling, he also eliminated all kinds of emotions. He sat down cross-legged, held a piece of inferior spirit stone in his hand, closed his eyes and calmed his heart. He cultivated the Shang Yuan, sword qi technique again. The pure spiritual qi from the inferior spirit stone seeped into his palm, followed the meridians in his arm, and merged with the Shang Yuan sword qi in his body. The Shang Yuan sword qi, cultivated from the peak of the 6th level of the Shang Yuan sword qi technique, was even purer. The spiritual qi contained in the inferior spirit stone was also beyond Chu Mu's expectations. From the moment he obtained it until now, the pure spiritual qi in the same inferior spirit stone had not been completely absorbed by him. Wisps of pure spiritual qi continued to enter his meridians and were transported by the sword qi. They were transformed into Shang Yuan sword qi, and at the same time the Shang Yuan sword qi was purified bit by bit. Chu Mu was completely immersed in cultivation, and one big cycle after another was transported. Unknowingly, the 33 big cycles were completed, but the time spent was almost half the time compared to before he switched to the Shang Yuan sword qi technique. The last strand of Shang Yuan sword qi was transported back into Chu Mu's dantian. Just as Chu Mu was about to stop, the Shang Yuan sword qi in his dantian suddenly surged, and a deep rumbling sound was heard, as if his dantian was about to explode. Chu Mu quickly looked inside and found that the Shang Yuan sword qi in his dantian was constantly colliding with each other, dispersing and reforming. Under this kind of dispersing and reforming, the Shang Yuan sword qi became even purer. At some unknown time, the sword aura in his dantian stopped surging and regained its order. As for the upper origin sword aura, it was as if it had been reborn. Even Chu Mu could feel that at the center of the upper origin sword aura, there seemed to be an existence that slightly surpassed the upper origin sword aura. Chu Mu's dantian touched it slightly, and he felt a pain on the mental level, as if he had been cut by the edge of a sword. He had a guess, and hurriedly withdrew his dantian. After a careful examination, he smiled from the bottom of his heart. The Shang Yuan sword qi technique has finally broken through to the 7th level. It seems that the subtle existence that surpassed the Shang Yuan sword qi in my dantian is about to automatically form a strand of Xiantian sword qi. Unavoidably, Chu Mu was excited again. He did not know how long it would take for this strand of Xiantian sword qi to automatically form. Once the Xiantian sword qi is completely formed, I'll have another trump card. When that time comes, if I use the Xiantian sword qi to activate the killer move, Space Shattering Blade, its power will increase by a lot. I might even be able to threaten experts of the qi transformation stage. As he thought to himself, Chu Mu's excitement gradually calmed down. He stood up, took his 2 swords, and headed for the sword training platform again. It was close to noon. A bright sun hung high in the sky, emitting a warm but not scorching light. It illuminated the earth and nourished all living things. When it shone on one's body, it made one feel warm and comfortable in this early spring season. At the foot of Mount Qinglan, two lithe figures were leaping and leaping. They were extremely fast, and the rugged mountain roads were no obstacle to them. They were like cheetahs galloping across the flat plains. Not long after, they arrived at the mountain gate of the Azure Edge sword sect and stopped. They were two young swordsmen in their early 20s. Their eyes were clear, and they each had a sharp aura. They wore the green robes of the Azure Edge sword sect, and each carried a sword on their back. "Who are you two?" The two disciples guarding the mountain gate were shocked. They looked at them suspiciously, and after a few moments, they saluted with their swords and asked, "You don't even recognize your senior brother. How rude." One of the disciples' face darkened as he shouted unhappily, "There's only one senior brother in the Azure Edge sword sect, and that is senior brother Li Yi. Who are you two?" After being shouted at, the two disciples seemed to have been intimidated. Their faces changed, and they reacted by shouting back at him, "I am Luo Yufeng, the former senior brother." The other of the two smiled and said, "We are both disciples of the Azure Edge sword sect. You will know when one of you goes to report." Luo Yufeng, the former senior brother. The two disciples guarding the mountain gate thought for a while, and their faces suddenly changed. They hurriedly said, "Senior brothers, please wait for a moment. I will go report to the elder." One of the disciples turned and ran away. This was because it was not a particularly important matter, so there was no need to use a signal flare. After all, it was troublesome to make such a thing, so it was better to save as much as possible. They would only use it when a particularly important matter happened. After a period of time, a figure leaped and moved at an extremely fast speed, forming countless phantoms as he leaped and landed at the mountain gate, revealing his figure. It was a middle-aged man in his early 40s. It was Elder Luo. Elder Luo's eyes flashed like lightning, and when they fell on the faces of the two people who claimed to be disciples of the Azure Edge sword sect, excitement and joy appeared on his face. "Yufeng, you are back in Zhoujin. Not bad, I haven't seen you for a year, and your cultivation has broken through to the middle stage of 10th stage. Uncle." Luo Yufeng immediately smiled and saluted with his sword. "Greetings, Elder Luo." Zhou Jin also quickly saluted with his sword. Elder Luo was Luo Tianxiong's younger brother, and Luo Yufeng was Luo Tianxiong's son. It was natural for him to call Elder Luo uncle. "Let's go. The sect master will be very happy to see you back, especially you, Yufeng. I haven't seen you for a year, and your cultivation has reached the peak of 10th stage. Yuling will also be very happy to see you." Elder Luo smiled and nodded to the two disciples guarding the mountain gate. Together with Luo Yufeng and the other two, they quickly went to the main hall. Along the way, Luo Yufeng repeatedly asked Elder Luo about the various changes in the sword sect in the past year. Elder Luo naturally answered one by one, and Zhou Jin occasionally added a sentence. The three people in this harmonious conversation quickly rushed to the main hall to see the sect master Luo Tianxiong. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 121. It was the second morning after Luo Yufeng and Zhou Jin had returned to the Qingfeng sword sect. I really didn't expect that our sect would have 6 junior brothers who have reached the early 10th stage this time. This number is more than ever before. Luo Yufeng said with a smile. He felt gratified from the bottom of his heart. He was Luo Tianxiong's son and the junior sect master of the Qingfeng sword sect in name. The more outstanding a disciple was, the more beneficial it was for the sect. "Brother," Let me introduce them to you later. Among the 6 disciples who have reached the early 10th stage, one of them is the most outstanding. Luo Yuling was as happy as a little white rabbit, bouncing around happily. Her eyes were like crescent moons, and her smile was like a flower. You're talking about that junior brother called Chumu, right? Luo Yufeng's eyes had a hint of a teasing smile. His face had a look of understanding, which made Luo Yuling's cheeks turn red and her eyes ripple with shyness. Luo Yufeng smiled and said, "Okay, I'd like to see what magic this Chumu has to open up my sister's heart." "Brother." Luo Yuling was even more embarrassed. She lightly stomped her foot and pinched her sleeves. "I'm ignoring you." "Ha." Luo Yufeng laughed. He hadn't experienced this feeling in a long time. In a place like the Li Province Sword Academy, his nerves were always tense, and he didn't dare to relax in the slightest. But after returning to the Qingfeng sword sect, especially after seeing his family, he was completely relaxed. Suddenly, there was a kind of comfort that came from the bottom of his heart. Luo Yufeng missed it very much. Suddenly, a trace of sadness appeared in Luo Yuling's eyes, but it quickly disappeared because she remembered Chu Mu's attitude towards her. He was neither cold nor warm, just like the others. "Junior sister, what's wrong? Did that Chu Mu bully you?" Zhou Jin, who had been watching from the side, noticed Luo Yuling's sadness and quickly asked. He also saw Luo Yuling as a younger sister. How could he, as a brother, let his sister be wronged? "No," Luo Yuling said quickly. Luo Yufeng and Zhou Jin looked at each other. Luo Yufeng didn't say anything, but Zhou Jin's eyes flashed with a sneer. Chu Mu. He had heard this name so many times that his ears were about to form calluses. Ever since he returned to the Qingfeng sword sect and met the sect leader, the 3 chancellors and the elders, he kept hearing the name Chu Mu from them. Chu Mu's achievements were also mentioned by the sect master and the elders in an excited tone, as if they were showing off. This feeling made Zhou Jin feel very uncomfortable. In any case, when Zhou Jin had stayed in the Azure Edge sword sect a year ago, he had been the 2nd senior brother among the many disciples. In the hearts of many disciples, his position was second only to Luo Yufeng. At that time, even the current eldest senior brother, Li Yi, and the other 2 would have to stop and greet him respectfully as 2nd senior brother. In a while, we'll know what kind of person Chu Mu is. Zhou Jin sneered inwardly. If he doesn't know what's good for him, I don't mind teaching him a lesson and letting him know how to behave. Unknowingly, the 3 of them had arrived at the elite disciple area. The reason why the sect leader hadn't summoned Chu Mu and the others was entirely Luo Yufeng's idea. After all, the 2 of them had returned from the Lizho Sword Academy because they had received a letter from the sword sect. They had specially acted as guides to bring the 10th stage junior brothers of the sword sect to the Lizho Sword Academy to cultivate. Therefore, they had planned to unexpectedly come and see their junior brothers. Under Luo Yuling's lead, the 3 of them went directly to the sword training platform because Luo Yuling knew that at this time, Chu Mu would usually be practicing sword techniques at the sword training platform. When the 3 of them arrived at the sword training platform, they indeed saw 6 disciples practicing sword techniques there. It was Chu Mu, Xiao Qianfeng, and the others. "Brother, he's Chu Mu." Luo Yuling's gaze swept over, and her eyes immediately lit up. She pointed at one of them and said with a tone of joy. Following Luo Yuling's finger, Luo Yufeng and Zhou Jin both stared at one of the figures. At this time, Chu Mu had just finished practicing the cloud-shattering sword technique and was chatting with Li Yi and the others. It seems that there's nothing special about him. Luo Yufeng muttered to himself. However, he knew that some people didn't show off, but they had a deep heart and couldn't be judged by appearance. His looks are ordinary and there's nothing special about him. Zhou Jin directly said. His tone carried a bit of contempt and imperceptible hostility, causing Luo Yuling to frown slightly. At this time, Li Yi just happened to turn around and look over. His gaze swept over and landed on Luo Yufeng's face. At first, he was stunned. Then a trace of excitement flashed across his face. This caused Yuan, Wenhua, Wang Tinggou, and Xie Chunlei to be slightly stunned. They followed his gaze and also landed on Luo Yufeng's face. Senior brother Luo. There was a slight tremor in their voices. Li Yi and the others looked even more excited. 4 junior brothers, we haven't seen each other for 2 years. Congratulations on breaking through to stage 10. Luo Yufeng walked over with a sincere smile on his face and a gentle tone. Back then, he had also taught Li Yi and the others swordsmanship, so he had a better understanding of it. Senior brother Luo, have you been staying at the Liz Ho Sword Academy for the past 2 years? Li Yi and the others revealed a look of sudden realization. 2 years ago, Luo Yufeng had suddenly disappeared, but they didn't know where he went. Now that they had broken through to stage 10 and were told the location of the Liz Ho Sword Academy by the sect leader, they finally reacted. That's right. I've been staying at the Liz Ho Sword Academy for the past 2 years. This time, Zhou Jin and I came back to take you to the Liz Ho Sword Academy to further your studies. Luo Yufeng smiled. There was no one else around, so he didn't hide anything. With Luo Yuling's talent, it was only a matter of time before she entered the Liz Ho Sword Academy. In addition, her identity was special, so it was nothing to know about the Liz Ho Sword Academy in advance. You're all going to the Liz Ho Sword Academy, right? Zhou Jin took a step forward and shouted with a serious face. His gaze swept across Xiao Qianfeng's face and finally landed on Chu Mu's face. Who is Chu Mu? Step forward. Chu Mu frowned slightly, and the others also revealed puzzled expressions. But Chu Mu still took 2 steps forward, his brows relaxed, and his expression was indifferent. He looked straight at Zhou Jin and said indifferently, I am Chu Mu. What advice do you have for me? Advice, indeed. I should give you some advice. Zhou Jin glanced at Chu Mu with a high and mighty gaze and said coldly, I heard from the sect leader and the various elders about how amazing you are and how outstanding your swordsmanship is. It can be seen that the upper echelons of the sect value you greatly and have high hopes for you. However, the Liz Ho Sword Academy is not as gentle as the other sword sects. The competition there is very fierce. If you relax even a little, you will be cast aside. People who are known as geniuses can only be considered as ordinary people there. In order to prevent you from falling too far behind, I, as your senior brother, will give you some advice first. I will let you know that people need to know how to be humble. Luo Yuling's expression changed slightly. She was about to speak, but Luo Yufeng pulled her back and secretly shook his head. Luo Yufeng was a little surprised by Zhou Jin's attack, but he didn't stop him because what Zhou Jin said about the Liz Ho Sword Academy was true. On the other hand, he was also very curious about Chu Mu's strength and really wanted to see it for himself. Chu Mu's cultivation was at the early 10th level, and Zhou Jin's cultivation was at the middle 10th level. Those who could enter the Liz Ho Sword Academy to study were all geniuses. Therefore, with Zhou Jin's strength, even if he faced an ordinary swordsman at the late 10th level, he could fight and even win. When the sect leader and the elders talked about Chu Mu, although they appreciated and valued him very much, there were some things that they didn't say, such as how he killed Wei Hong, a 10th level swordsman in the Qinglan virtual realm. In fact, Chu Mu was also vague. He only said that Wei Hong was injured in a battle with a high-level beast and that he was lucky to kill him. However, for a 9th phase peak to kill a 10th phase peak, even if the opponent was injured, it was still very shocking. The reason why he did not say it was to prevent too many people who knew about it from leaking out. If the Green Orchid Sword sect was driven to desperation, they would send experts to kill Chu Mu. Otherwise, Luo Yufeng would definitely stop Zhou Jin. Although Chu Mu didn't know why this person had some hostility towards him as soon as he appeared, he was not afraid. Although the aura observation technique couldn't see through his cultivation, he estimated that he was around the middle 10th level. Such a cultivation was really like an ant in his eyes. "Please," Chu Mu said lightly. Li Yi and the others looked expressionless, but when they looked at Zhou Jin, there was a flash of pity in their eyes. They saw with their own eyes that Chu Mu killed Wei Hong, who was at the peak of 10th level, with a sword. Was this Zhou Jin more powerful than Wei Hong? Luo Yufeng naturally also noticed the look in Li Yi and the others' eyes and suddenly felt very surprised. While he was secretly thinking, Zhou Jin was already laughing coldly. He was angered by Chu Mu's indifferent attitude and pulled out his sword. The sword Zhou Jin used was also a fake sword. On the sword's body, there were faint traces of gold flowing, emitting a sharp light. It was a fake sword that leaned towards the metal element. With the sword in hand, Zhou Jin's expression changed, becoming serious and fierce. The aura around him reverberated, cutting through the air, causing people to feel a chill in their hearts. It was as if their bodies were surrounded by countless sword qi, stinging their skin and causing them to have no choice but to retreat. "Senior brother, be careful." Luo Yiling didn't know Chu Mu's true strength, so she was very worried. Chu Mu nodded slightly. His expression was still as indifferent as before. His eyes were clear, and he just stood there straight. The aura around his body condensed into one, circulating around his body, causing Luo Yufeng and Zhou Jin's expressions to change, because they found that the current Chu Mu in their eyes was flawless without the slightest flaw. When a skilled swordsman attacked with his sword, he would always first find a flaw in his opponent, then attack with his sword. Only then would he have a chance to win. If there was no flaw, it would be difficult to attack. Acting rashly would instead expose one's own flaw and be at a disadvantage. "If there's no flaw, I'll create one for you," Zhou Jin secretly shouted, and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. He feinted with his sword, pretending to attack Chu Mu, intending to force Chu Mu to reveal a flaw. However, Chu Mu's expression was still indifferent, and he didn't move at all. Zhou Jin suddenly felt as if he had been seen through. He felt uncomfortable from the bottom of his heart and couldn't help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. However, he didn't recklessly attack with his sword. Instead, after his anger, he entered a calm state and released a sharp and majestic aura that crushed over. This made Chu Mu a little surprised. Sure enough, he wasn't an idiot. "In that case, I'll give you a flaw to attack," Chu Mu thought to himself. Although he didn't know why this person from the Sword Academy was hostile to him. The reason why Chu Mu agreed to fight with his opponent was that he wanted to see the level of swordsmanship of the Sword Academy's disciples. This would be of some help to him in understanding the Sword Academy a step earlier. The flow of his aura became slightly sluggish. The others couldn't see it, but Luo Yufeng and Zhou Jin could. While Luo Yufeng was secretly suspicious, Zhou Jin thought that Chu Mu couldn't withstand his pressure and revealed the slightest flaw. With a low shout, he stabbed out with his sword. Sword light condensed into one and turned into a golden ray that shot out in a straight line. Chu Mu's eyes lit up slightly, and he secretly nodded. When an expert made a move, it was obvious whether he was skilled or not. When Zhou Jin stabbed out with his sword, Chu Mu knew that his attainments in swordsmanship were above Li Yi and the others. Only Xiao Qianfeng could compare to him. Chu Mu didn't receive it. Instead, he casually moved his feet. As he swayed back and forth, his body was like a willow branch in the wind, and Zhou Jin's sword instantly missed. Luo Yufeng's heart trembled. His pupils contracted slightly, and the light condensed into needles. He stared at Chu Mu as if he wanted to see through him. As for Zhou Jin, he was slightly shocked. The speed of his sword suddenly doubled, and he didn't hold back at all. Sword qi surged around him, and threads of faint golden light cut through the air, producing sharp whistling sounds. The disciples only felt that their eyes were filled with a faint golden light. The streaks of sharpness made them squint their eyes slightly, otherwise they would feel a piercing pain. They were all extremely shocked. If they were facing such an attack, they wouldn't be able to block even one sword, let alone so many. They would immediately be killed. However, Chumu seemed to be able to advance and retreat freely. His feet moved within a small range, and he easily dodged each of Zhou Jin's sword quickly and fiercely. It felt as if the two of them had discussed and practiced before. However, they could all feel the sharpness of Zhou Jin's sword. It was becoming increasingly sharper, and it was definitely not for show. Zhou Jin's face became extremely ugly. Sword chi surged and constantly surged around. He attacked with all his strength, but he couldn't do anything to Chumu. He almost couldn't help but use his killing move. "Okay, stop," Luo Yufeng suddenly shouted, and it made Zhou Jin slightly tremble. The anger in his heart dissipated, and he quickly retreated, sheathing his sword. His face was incomparably ugly, and his heart was incomparably complicated. He was a middle 10th phase swordsman. Moreover, he wasn't an ordinary swordsman. He had gone through a year of cultivation in a place like the Lizho Sword Academy and had made great progress in all aspects. However, even with his cultivation and sword skills, he couldn't do anything to a newly promoted early 10th phase disciple. He didn't even have the ability to make his opponent draw his sword. Although he thought highly of himself, Zhou Jin was not a fool. He naturally saw that Chumu could easily avoid his sword because he could see the trajectory of his sword, and so on. As long as he counterattacked, he would definitely be able to defeat him. Haha! As expected of the genius that the headmaster and the elders have placed high hopes on. Chumu, you are indeed extraordinary. Luo Yufeng smiled as if he was trying to smooth things over. He looked at Chumu, and his eyes were full of encouragement. Luo Yuling raised her white neck and seemed to be very proud. It was as if Chumu was someone to her, and she felt proud from the bottom of her heart. Junior brother Chu, although you didn't draw your sword, I, Zhou Jin, am willing to admit defeat. Zhou Jin took a deep breath, and his heart gradually calmed down. His face also returned to normal. He took a step forward and solemnly said to Chumu with a sword salute, "Senior brother Zhou's attainments in swordsmanship are also extraordinary." Chumu smiled slightly. His arrogance and pride were only directed at his enemies. Zhou Jin had no enmity with him, and when he knew that he was no match for him, he was able to admit his inferiority. Such a person was worthy of the title of a swordsman. "Junior brother, don't discourage me." Zhou Jin smiled bitterly, and then his eyes lit up. "With junior brother's swordsmanship, once your cultivation improves, you will be able to fight for a place even in the Sword Academy." "Thank you for your kind words." Chumu faintly smiled. His bearing was out of the ordinary, causing others to admire him even more. "Junior brothers who have reached 10th stage, pack up and get ready to set off with us. We will go to the Lizho Sword Academy to study together." Luo Yufeng smiled. Li Yi and the others were all excited. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 122. What? The two of you aren't going with us to the Li Province Sword Academy? Zhou Jin's eyes widened as he stared at Chumu and Xiao Qianfeng. His voice was like a machine gun as he said, "Haven't you already decided? Moreover, your cultivations have already reached 10th stage. If you want to improve faster and become stronger, entering the Li Province Sword Academy is the most direct and correct choice." Senior brother Zhou, Chumu and Xiao Qianfeng's intentions are not to enter the Li Province Sword Academy to cultivate, but rather, they're not going with us. They plan to go to the Li Province Sword Academy by themselves. Li Yi explained after Zhou Jin stopped. "What?" Zhou Jin's eyes widened again. "You're not going with us?" "No, absolutely not. You have to know that the outside world is not as safe as the sword sect. The slightest accident can lead to death. Both of you have high hopes placed on you. Nothing must happen to you. Therefore, it's safer for you to travel with us. Senior brother, Thank you for your kind intentions. However, I insist on my choice. Chu Mu indifferently said. His tone had an unquestionable and unshakable firmness. Although Xiao Qianfeng didn't say anything, his eyes and expression all revealed an unstoppable sharpness. Any powerful swordsman has to experience various successes and failures. Zhou Jin, there's no need to say anything more. Seeing Zhou Jin's anxious expression, Luo Yufeng interrupted with a faint smile on his face. His eyes seemed to be deep in thought as he continued. Junior brother Chu and junior brother Xiao have made their own choices. They are also very clear about their choices. Then, junior brothers, let's meet at the Li Province Sword Academy. Okay, Chu Mu replied softly. Xiao Qianfeng nodded imperceptibly. Li Yi and the others looked at Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng with envy. They secretly admired them for making such a choice. Although they were itching to make a move, they knew that it would not be an easy journey to the Li Province Sword Academy. Traveling together with Luo Yufeng and Zhou Jin was the best choice. Junior brother Chu, junior brother Xiao, let's meet again at the Li State Sword Academy. Li Yi cupped his hands in salute and smiled. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng also returned greeting. Let's go. As Luo Yufeng spoke, he quickly turned around and left. Zhou Jin glanced at Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but he rolled his eyes and let out a light sigh before turning around and leaving as well. Li Yi and the others also put on their backpacks and brought along their 100 refined swords. They waved their hands at Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng before leaving with Luo Yufeng and the others. Luo Yuling walked behind Luo Yufeng, but she kept looking back. Sigh. Luo Yufeng naturally saw Luo Yuling's expression and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Although she had only known Chu Mu for a short period of time, she could feel that Chu Mu was a true swordsman. There was only the sword in his heart. He didn't care about romantic feelings, at least for now. No one knew what would happen in the future. But this determined that Luo Yuling's love for Chu Mu could only be one-sided. It was destined to come to a sad end. But Luo Yufeng didn't plan to say anything. He would let nature take its course. He deeply understood that only by experiencing some things, success and failure, would one be able to truly understand and grow. Senior brother. Li Wei's eyes reddened. Her clear eyes that rippled like water were filled with reluctance. Her small hand tightly grasped the backpack prepared for Chu Mu. You're already at stage 7 and can become an inner disciple of the main palace. Cultivate well in the future and strive to become an elite disciple. Chu Mu comforted. Yes, senior brother. I'll definitely work hard in my cultivation. Li Wei pursed her lips. Her small face was filled with determination. She forcefully nodded her head and passed the backpack in her hands to Chu Mu. She didn't know where Chu Mu was going. She only had a feeling that this separation might be a very long time. Perhaps it would be forever. After receiving the backpack, Chu Mu put it on his back. There was also a fake fire python sword on his back. His left hand held the fake clear wind sword, and his right hand patted Li Wei's head. A trace of doting flashed in his eyes. This kind of feeling was just like how an older brother would treat his younger sister. Subsequently, under Li Wei's reluctant gaze, Chu Mu turned around and walked away. He cut off the last trace of reluctance in his heart and walked away in large strides. All that was left was a figure that was gradually walking further and further away. It filled the world and was reflected in Li Wei's pupils as if it was branded into eternity. Together with Xiao Qianfeng, they bid farewell to the sect master, the 3 monastery heads, and the various elders in the main hall. After that, they left the Azure Edge Sword Sect in a low-key manner. They walked out of the Azure Edge Sword Sect's mountain gate and headed down the mountain. Only the sect master and the others knew about their departure. As for the other disciples, although they were very curious, they had no way of knowing. They could only secretly guess, just like every other time. Within the Green Edge Sword sect, there was a tree that was over 2 meters tall in a relatively remote area not far from the main gate of the sect. Beside it stood a petite figure dressed in snow-white robes. Her beautiful face was filled with reluctance to part. Her pair of beautiful eyes stared unblinkingly at Chu Mu's departing figure. Her eyes were filled with reluctance to part. Her pure white teeth lightly bit her rosy lips, stopping the words that were about to rush out of her mouth. She waited until Chu Mu's figure disappeared from her sight. Senior brother Chu, I will also work hard to cultivate and reach the 10th stage of the Sword Chi realm as soon as possible. When that time comes, I will go to the Liz Ho Sword Academy to look for you. I will boldly confide in you. Her voice was soft and gentle. A gentle mountain breeze blew gently, carrying this murmur to the distance, to the sky, to the earth, and perhaps to the ears of the person she loved. In a courtyard of the Azure Edge Sword sect. Elder, according to the news from the spies, Li Yi and the others from the Azure Edge Sword sect are leaving the mountain through the Azure Edge town. There are a total of 6 people. A disciple of the Azure Edge Sword sect saluted to Elder Yao Ri and said, among the 6 of them there are 2 unfamiliar faces. They are suspected to be the former senior brother Luo Yufeng and second senior brother Zhou Jin. In addition, Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng have teamed up and are heading in another direction. Luo Yufeng, Chu Mu. Elder Yao Ri heard and fell into deep thought. His eyes flashed with a deep light. Azure Edge Sword sect, you are indeed very lucky this time. In the trip to the Azure Edge Void Realm, there are actually 6 disciples who have left alive. It seems that this time at least 4 of these disciples have broken through to the early stage of the 10th stage and were taken by Luo Yufeng to the Liz Ho Sword Academy to cultivate. This time, all of the disciples of the Azure Edge Sword sect died in the Azure Edge Void Realm. None of them came out alive. Otherwise, there would be people who were taken by Wei Hong to the Liz Ho Sword Academy. Thinking of this, Elder Yao Ri's eyes flashed with a strong murderous intent. His whole body surged with a strong murderous intent, causing the disciple's expression to change drastically. It was as if he was in a furnace, sweating profusely, and his skin turned red. He had no choice but to retreat. Go and ask Deacon Lu to come over. Tell him that I have something important to discuss with him. Elder Yao restrained his murderous intent and looked at the disciple coldly. Yes, Elder. The disciple felt as if he had been pardoned. After saluting with his sword, he hurriedly turned and left. In front of Elder Yao Ri, he was too depressed. With the talent of Li Yi and the others, even if they enter the Liz Ho Sword Academy, they won't be able to make any waves. I'll write a letter to the Liz Ho Sword Academy and ask the disciples in the academy to take good care of them. Elder Yao Ri seemed to be talking to himself. However, Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng must die. Especially Chu Mu, he must die. He must die. There was no such thing as an airtight wall in the world. The situation at the Qingfeng Sword Sect's Sword Battle Festival had already been known by the Azure Edge Sword Sect and the Qingshui Sword Sect. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng had also entered the eyes of the upper echelons of the 2 sects and were paid more attention. It just so happens that Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng are traveling together. It seems that they haven't broken through to the 10th stage yet, so they plan to go out and gain experience. Traces of murderous intent flowed in Elder Yao Ri's eyes. He laughed coldly. My sword chi art has reached a bottleneck and is on the verge of a breakthrough. It's very unstable and not suitable for me to fight. However, it's enough to have Deacon Lu fight. They're just 2 ants in the sword chi realm. Even if they break through to the 10th stage, they won't be a match for someone in the chi transformation realm. Haha. If the Qingfeng Sword Sect knows that Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng are dead, I wonder how exciting it will be. Yes, in order to prevent the Qingfeng Sword Sect from acting out of desperation, I have to strictly order Deacon Liu to remove all traces after killing them and not leave any evidence behind. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 123. My mind is blank. My fingers are stiff. I'm going to take a bath and sleep. Qinglan Mountain was located in a relatively remote part of Lizhou. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng left Luo Yufeng and the others and traveled together. Fortunately, they had the topographic map of the sword sect for them to consult. Before they left, they had already memorized the topographic map. After going down the mountain, Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng did not go to Qinglan Town. Instead, they went in the direction of Qinglan Town along a remote road. Both of them carried a bag on their backs. Inside the bags were naturally some things that must be used. As for the elixirs and the like, of course, they were kept in their arms. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng were both people of few words. Along the way, they used their movement techniques to leap forward. Although they didn't say anything, neither of them fell behind. Their speed was extremely fast, and they were like two strong gusts of wind blowing forward, causing the tender green grass on the side of the road to bend over. At the same time, from the Qinglan sword sect, there was also a masked figure in gray with a sword on his back. He used his body movement extremely fast, leaping up like an eagle, and went down the mountain. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng, the two genius disciples of the Qingfeng sword sect. If such disciples were placed in the Qinglan sword sect, it would be a blessing for the sect. But if they were placed in other sword sects, especially the Qingfeng sword sect, it would be a disaster for the sect. The masked man said to himself in a voice that only he could hear. In his long and narrow eyes, there was an astonishing, murderous intent. These two people must be killed. With my sword, Qi cultivation at the beginning of the Qi transformation realm, no matter how strong they are, as long as they have not broken through to the Qi transformation realm, there is no way they can be my opponents. If I want to kill them, it will be a piece of cake. It was said that it was easier to go up the mountain than to go down the mountain. However, the masked man in gray was incredibly fast. The rugged Qinglan Mountain did not pose the slightest hindrance to him. Instead, he used the terrain to be faster and more flexible. The two figures in the running suddenly stopped and looked at each other. From each other's clear eyes, there was a trace of seriousness in their own eyes. It was a feeling that came from the mind. They felt that there seemed to be some kind of danger coming, and the target was the two of them. A glint flashed across his eyes. Immediately, he smiled in a carefree manner, and the two of them moved once again. Crisis? To be able to make them feel a sense of danger, the opponent must be very powerful or have all kinds of schemes and plots. However, he believed in the sword in his hand. With the sword in his hand, he would be able to break through all schemes and schemes. No matter how strong the enemy was, he would not be afraid. As he ran, he approached a cliff. The bottom of the cliff was so deep that he couldn't see the bottom. It was as if it was shrouded in clouds all year round. It was full of mystery. Suddenly, a gust of wind whistled from behind them, causing Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng's expressions to slightly change as they subconsciously separated to the left and right. At the same time, from the middle, a figure wrapped in an incomparably strong gale swept past, blowing the sand and stones on the ground into the air, and the tender green grass was almost uprooted. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng were blown away by the wind, and they quickly retreated. Their eyes narrowed slightly, and as their pupils contracted, a trace of sharp light shot out as they stared at the figure in front of them, who had stopped and turned around. A pair of long and narrow eyes that were exposed to the outside shot out a sharp light that was like the edge of a sword. They swept across Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng's faces from dozens of meters away. The sharpness of the light was very threatening, causing Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng to feel slightly suffocated. It was as if the surrounding air was being compressed, causing them to feel oppressed. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng, that's the two of you. Go to hell. A strange cackle rang out, and the voice was deliberately lowered. A trace of playfulness appeared in the long and narrow eyes of the gray-clothed, masked man. In an instant he raised his right hand and grabbed the hilt of his sword with lightning speed. An extremely ear-piercing sound of metal rubbing against each other rang out, causing the air to vibrate. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng only felt their vision blur for a moment. Immediately, an incomparably fierce and scorching aura spread out like a torrent of flames. From afar, Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng felt as if they were being roasted and suffocated. It was as if a raging furnace had suddenly appeared in front of them. Following that, they each saw a fiery red sword aura that seemed to tear apart the world in front of their eyes as it slashed towards them at high speed. This fiery red sword aura was incomparably dense, as if it was formed by the compression of two flames. It filled their eyes, and nothing else could be seen. In an instant, an intense and fatal sense of danger came from their hearts. Their brains felt as if they were about to explode. The sword aura within their dantian crazily surged out of their meridians like a torrent that had broken through a dam. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng could clearly feel that their meridians were about to burst. Their eyes widened, and their pupils contracted and contracted in an instant. Without holding anything back, they let out a low roar as their throats slightly squirmed. Their feet forcefully stomped on the ground, and the sword aura violently shot out, causing the ground to shatter and green grass to fly everywhere. The two figures instantly transformed into two auroras and shot out in different directions. Two fiery red sword auras shot past them by a hair's breadth. The incomparably intense heat felt as if it was going to burn the two of them into ashes. Two loud bangs rang out as the two fiery red sword auras bombarded the ground in the distance. They immediately exploded, and countless amounts of soil were charred black. The shockingly high temperature shot out in all directions like bullets. Along the way, two clear scorched marks could be seen on the ground. Everywhere they passed, the vibrant green grass would wither and shatter. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng paused their bodies in a somewhat sorry state. They threw their bags to the side and leaned forward slightly. Their right hand gripped the hilt of their sword, and their eyes emitted an incomparably sharp light that pierced through the air. They stared at the gray, clothed masked man from afar with incomparable seriousness. Qi Transformation Realm. That's right, the power of those two fiery red sword auras was incomparably tyrannical. Once they were hit, even if they didn't die, they would be injured. That was something that only Xiantian sword auras could do. And to be able to grasp Xiantian sword auras, one had to be at least a Qi Transformation Realm expert. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng's hearts were incomparably serious. At the same time, a trace of excitement and agitation slowly grew in the depths of their hearts, gradually bursting forth. In essence, Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng were actually the same kind of people. They were born for the sword, crazy for the sword, and crazy for the sword. It was just that the way they displayed it was somewhat different. The expression in their eyes changed little by little. Traces of madness gradually appeared in their eyes. You actually dodged. The two of you do have some ability. A trace of astonishment appeared in the gray, clothed masked man's long and narrow eyes. He then coldly laughed. However, in front of me, you are like ants. Obediently accept the arrival of death. Resistance will only make you suffer more. Before the gray, clothed masked man finished speaking, Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng's feet fiercely stomped on the ground. Countless amounts of dirt flew up, and two holes appeared in the ground. With a whoosh, two figures, one on the left and one on the right, shot towards the gray, clothed masked man, and the surrounding scenery rapidly receded. A clanging sound rang out, as if divine metals from outer space collided. It was ear-piercing and sharp. A trace of light green and a trace of light gold condensed into a line, transforming into two aurora-like rays of light that carried an incomparably strong killing intent. one from above and one from below, slashed towards the gray, clothed masked man. Although they had never worked together before, at this moment, the two of them had an extremely great tacit understanding. They completely sealed off the gray, clothed masked man's advance and retreat. Moreover, their sword auras had condensed into a sharp edge. This was because they both knew that with their initial 10th phase sword auras, they simply couldn't pose any threat to a Chi transformation realm expert. Only the sharp edge of a fake sword could cause damage to a Chi transformation realm expert's Xiantian sword aura. 2 ants. How interesting. You actually dared to attack me. A trace of astonishment flashed through the gray, clothed masked man's long and narrow eyes. Soon after, it turned into a playful expression. With 2 swishing sounds, he once again slashed out 2 streaks of fiery red sword aura. However, Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng, who were charging at high speed, suddenly twisted their bodies in a strange manner. Not only did they avoid the gray, clothed masked man's sword aura, they also strangely accelerated their approach and attacked with their 2 swords. The gray, clothed masked man's sword attack was extremely fast, as if it had split into 2 sword shadows. It sealed off Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng's attacks from above and below, producing ear-piercing, clanging sounds. Under the powerful force, Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng only felt the fake swords in their hands tremble. Their palms went numb, and their fake swords almost flew out of their hands. Chu Mu used a technique to disperse the force of the rebound. Swish, swish, swish. His sword stabbed out like a cool breeze. On the other hand, Xiao Qianfeng turned his body to disperse the force of the rebound. He turned around and slashed out with an extremely swift and fierce slash. The gray, clothed masked man's heart trembled. He completely didn't expect that Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng would actually have this kind of reaction. He hurriedly struck out with his sword and blocked Xiao Qianfeng's sword. Then he immediately turned around and blocked Chu Mu's sword. But who was Chu Mu? He was at the Sword Master realm. How could his sword be so easy to block? It seemed simple, but there was actually a profound principle behind it. After a few strikes, the expression of the gray, clothed, masked man suddenly changed. He actually couldn't catch the trajectory of Chu Mu's sword. He could only rely on his higher cultivation and faster speed to forcefully block Chu Mu's sword. The clanging sounds were unceasing. Chu Mu's sword seemed to have come alive. It was full of spirituality. Sword after sword stabbed, slashed, cut, and slashed. Every strike was aimed at the gray, clothed masked man's vital points, forcing him into a passive position to block Chu Mu's sword. Behind him, Xiao Qianfeng's sword arrived in a timely manner, carrying an intense sharpness and killing intent. The gray, clothed masked man only felt a chill on his back. He hurriedly blocked Chu Mu's sword with his sword and quickly retreated. I've long heard that Chu Mu's sword skills are extraordinary. Today, I've personally experienced it, and it's indeed true. His sword skills are actually above mine. The gray, clothed masked man thought to himself as he retreated. The killing intent in his heart became even stronger. This person must die. I definitely can't let him grow. Kill. Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng glanced at each other. Their eyes flashed with killing intent. Like an arrow leaving the bowstring, they once again charged forward with endless sharpness and killing intent. Damned ants. So what if your sword skills are good? In front of an absolute difference in sword chi cultivation, you're nothing. When the gray-clothed masked man saw that Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng didn't know what was good for them, he immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. With a loud shout, sword chi surged from his entire body. His body seemed to have turned into a furnace, releasing a terrifying scorching aura that fluctuated in all directions. The surrounding air was stirred up, and the spiritual energy within a 10-meter radius became incomparably hot. A fiery red color quickly spread. The gray, clothed masked man stood in the middle of the fiery, red, spiritual energy, as if he was burning. The sword in his hand also seemed to have turned into flowing flames. As he slowly waved his right hand, Chu-Mu and Xiao Qianfeng felt as if their bodies were ignited. Their blood boiled and their expressions changed greatly. An extremely strong sense of danger arose spontaneously. The two of them hurriedly stopped their charging bodies. The surging sword qi fiercely struck the ground in front of them, and their bodies rapidly retreated. Die! The gray, clothed masked man let out an explosive roar full of killing intent. The sword in his hand fiercely slashed down through the air. In an instant, countless fiery red rays transformed into rays of sword aura that covered the sky and covered the earth as they slashed down. Like a flood of magma, they directly submerged Chu-Mu and Xiao Qianfeng's bodies. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Qijian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 124. Loud rumbling sounds rolled out as the fiery red sword qi formed into a terrifying wave, emitting an incomparably high temperature. The tender green grass on the ground completely lost its moisture and quickly dried up. Then, like dry grass that had been burned by fire, it turned into ashes. The instant the terrifying fiery red sword qi wave surged over, Chu-Mu and Xiao Qianfeng both felt the air around them become incomparably hot. Moreover, it was compressed, making it difficult for them to move and dodge for a moment. Their expressions changed greatly as a fatal sense of danger suddenly exploded in their minds. Their scalps went numb, and the pores on their bodies opened up. A trembling feeling that came from the depths of their hearts gushed out like spring water, causing their bodies to tremble uncontrollably. Terrifying, extremely terrifying. The fiery innate sword qi wave formed by the fiery innate sword qi seemed as if it could even burn the space. A bright red color was reflected in Chu-Mu and Xiao Qianfeng's trembling eyes. It was as if the entire world had been filled with red. The sword qi in their dantian seemed to have exploded, instantly rushing out of their dantian and attacking their meridians. It rushed out of every pore and condensed around their bodies, forming an armor to protect them. Faint golden sword qi revolved around Xiao Qianfeng's body. Strands of sword qi circulated around Xiao Qianfeng's body. It was filled with a strange and magnificent color, and it carried an endless sharpness. In an instant, it collided with the fiery red sword qi that was violently rushing towards him. With a cracking sound, Xiao Qianfeng's incomparably pure metal sword qi was unable to withstand the innate sword qi. It was instantly shattered, and the terrifying fiery innate sword qi directly bombarded Xiao Qianfeng's body. Xiao Qianfeng's body flew back dozens of meters in an instant. As for Chu-Mu, his sword aura armor was instantly shattered by the fire-type innate sword qi. The power of this innate sword qi was something that even the upper elemental sword qi he cultivated from his yellow rank upper elemental sword qi technique could not compare. Unless Chu-Mu used his Xiantian sword qi to block it, but there was only one Xiantian sword qi. Once it was consumed, it would take several days to condense it again. In an instant, Chu-Mu manipulated the sword qi and gathered them in front of him, colliding with the raging fire element Xiantian sword qi. Once again, the Xiantian sword qi was shattered and heavily smashed onto Chu-Mu's body, colliding with the invisible protective sword qi. Chu-Mu's body was also sent flying dozens of meters away by the violent impact of the fire elemental Xiantian sword qi. He landed on the ground and rolled a few times before the flames on his clothes were extinguished. However, more than half of his cyan gown had been burned, and his face was covered in dirt, making him look extremely miserable. More than half of Xiao Qianfeng's azure robe had been burned away. His hair was curled up, and he lay motionless on the ground. Wisps of azure smoke rose from his body, and he looked as if he had been roasted. However, the fake sword was tightly gripped in his hand, as if it was inseparable from his life. Wherever the Xiantian sword chi passed, it left behind a trail of ash. The charred ground emitted wisps of smoke. Humph, ants will always be ants. So what if your sword skills are good? The masked man in gray exhaled and coldly muttered to himself. In the face of an absolute difference in sword chi cultivation, no matter how good your sword skills are, you still won't be able to unleash their full power. Two mere early 10th stage martial artists want to fight against me? They're simply dreaming. This violent strike of Xiantian sword chi had consumed a lot of his Xiantian sword chi, but it was still worth it to kill two geniuses. They're both using fake swords. If I bring them back to the sword sect and turn them in, I'll be able to obtain a sea of contribution points. In addition, Elder Glorious Sun has promised to teach me a high-level sword skill after killing the two of them. The masked man in gray was delighted. Although he was an expert at the beginning of the chi transformation realm, the high-level swordsmanship he had mastered was only an incomplete high-level swordsmanship. There was nothing he could do about it. This was generally the case in low-grade sword sections. Therefore, when Elder Glorious Sun asked him to take action and promised to teach him a complete high-level sword skill, he didn't hesitate at all and immediately agreed. Coming back to his senses, the masked man in gray first looked at Xiao Qianfeng, then looked at Chu Mu. In a flash, he dashed towards Chu Mu. The sword in his hand flickered with a faint red light. I'll chop off your heads and bring them back to report on my mission. The masked man in gray raised his sword and chopped down. Suddenly, his vision blurred and his sword missed. A trace of coldness and sharpness abruptly came from behind, causing the masked man in gray's expression to change greatly. Xiantian's sword chi surged to form an armor as he hurriedly turned around and swept up a torrent of flames. The clanging sound was incomparably loud and ear-piercing. As the sparks scattered, a figure was sent flying backwards. The figure repeatedly waved his long sword and several sword chi slashed through the air. He actually didn't die. The masked man in gray's expression became incomparably gloomy. He shattered the sword chi with a single strike. One could imagine how unsightly his expression must be. His heart also felt a wave of lingering fear. He originally thought that he had killed Chu Mu, but he didn't expect that not only did he not die, he even wanted to take the opportunity to attack him. While the masked man in gray was angry and fearful, he also felt a trace of fear. An early 10th phase swordsman not only didn't die after being directly attacked by a chi transformation realm Xiantian sword chi, but also had the strength to counterattack. This was unheard of. Killing intent surged, filling his chest and almost exploding. The masked man in gray drew his sword, and a terrifying Xiantian sword chi once again shot out. Chu Mu completely displayed 30% of his wind conception and integrated it into his wandering in the wind movement. His body almost floated up, like a willow branch drifting erratically, avoiding the attack of the masked man in gray's Xiantian sword chi. The gray, clothed masked man waved his sleeve, and his entire body leapt into the air. It was as if he had ascended the 9 heavens, and he leapt 20 meters into the air. Looking down from above, his long and narrow eyes let out a terrifying killing intent as he stared at Chu Mu on the ground. His body turned, and his sleeves waved, creating a strong chi flow that produced a muffled sound of thunder. His whole body dropped down, and with a sword in front of him, he shot out like an arrow, tearing through the air. Carrying a fiery red color like a rainbow, he shot towards Chu Mu. An extremely terrifying fiery aura pressed down, and the surrounding temperature rose again. It became boiling hot, almost suffocating Chu Mu. Chu Mu's whole body felt like it was bound and suppressed, making it difficult for him to move. His face changed dramatically. This sword was too powerful, and he couldn't block it. Without holding anything back, Chu Mu focused his mind to 100 20% and mobilized all of the sword aura within 7 meters. Chumu felt as if his head was about to explode. The pressure around him loosened, and the sword aura 7 meters away surged and condensed into a crescent arc. It shot out and attacked the gray, clothed-masked man. With a cold shout, the masked man in gray swung his sword. Fire-type innate sword chi gathered on the pseudo-sword and flowed around it. The sword directly shattered the external sword chi attack, while Chumu took this opportunity to use his movement technique to quickly escape. He was very clear about one thing, and that was even if his sword skills were far superior to his opponents. But in front of the absolute gap in sword chi cultivation, he was far from being his opponent's opponent. Once he got close, it would be very disadvantageous for him. Only by increasing the distance, and then finding the right time to activate his only Xiantian sword chi and use the sky-splitting golden edge could he kill his opponent. That was his only chance, and he had to grasp it well. Otherwise, if he failed, Chumu wouldn't have a chance to turn the tables. Even if he wanted to escape, it would be very difficult. Even if his movement skill was better than his opponent's, under the huge gap in cultivation, he would still be on par or even surpassed. Xiao Qianfeng was still lying on the ground, motionless. Chumu felt that Xiao Qianfeng shouldn't be killed so easily. The masked man in gray leaped into the air and his sword pressed down. Waves of heat surged towards Chumu, as if he wanted to turn him into ashes. Chumu quickly retreated, and the masked man in gray chased after him. Like a meteor, he fell with his back facing Xiao Qianfeng. At this moment, all of his attention was on Chumu, and there was only one thought in his mind: kill Chumu. At this moment, the finger on Xiao Qianfeng's left hand moved slightly. His aura was withdrawn, and a faint golden light gathered on his left index finger. Holding the sword in his right hand, he stood up, and his left index finger touched the body of the fake sword. Following the ridge of the sword, he quickly wiped the tip of the sword. Wherever his finger passed, the sword seemed to come alive, and there was a dazzling golden light flickering. In an instant, Xiao Qianfeng's sharpness broke through his body, as if it had shattered his sorry state. He let out a low shout and slashed with his sword. An inch of sword light flickered, and his entire body seemed to become one with the sword in his hand. The sharpness almost pierced through the clouds. 1000-edge kill! The masked man in gray instantly felt the terrifying sharpness behind him. His expression changed greatly, and his pupils trembled. He quickly turned around and slashed his sword at Xiao Qianfeng. Xiao Qianfeng's momentum was fierce, and he used all of his strength to display the ultimate move of the endless way of the sword inheritance. Its power was extremely terrifying, and even the masked man in gray, who was at the beginning of the Qi transformation realm, felt a moment of fear. The terrifying faint golden sword light tore through the sky and collided with the masked man's fake sword. The sound of an explosion was extremely ear-piercing, and it echoed for several hundred meters. Wherever it passed, the air was shattered, and even the grass on the ground was turned into powder. It was as if the invisible sword chi had killed it. Under the attack of the enormous power, the masked man in gray only felt a terrifying sharpness penetrating through the fake sword, and at the same time he was startled. At the same time, he hurriedly used his innate sword chi to block it. The faint golden sword light shattered, and it splashed out like fireworks. It was exceptionally beautiful and dazzling. A figure was also instantly sent flying, and a stream of blood sprayed into the sky. Kill! Xiao Qianfeng roared, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. His voice echoed as he uncontrollably flew out of the cliff. Chumu's eyes flashed. This was the best opportunity. He instantly mobilized a strand of innate sword chi in his dantian, moving through his meridians. It actually made Chumu feel a tearing pain in his meridians. Enduring the pain, he quickly transferred the strand of innate sword chi to his arm and spread it to the fake, clear wind sword. A faint white and a faint golden color intertwined. Xiao Chun waved his sword in the air, and a thin golden light that was as fine as a needle cut through the void and disappeared. The masked man in gray, who was in the middle of dispersing Xiao Qianfeng's thousand-edged strike, couldn't help but tremble. The innate sword chi protecting his body seemed to have been cut in half and dissipated. His long and narrow eyes emitted a light of disbelief. He slowly lowered his head and looked at his waist. He saw that his clothes seemed to have been cut open by an invisible thread, and a scarlet color slowly spread out. Only then did he feel a bone-deep pain spread throughout his body, and he couldn't help but let out a blood-curdling scream. A strange sound was heard. It sounded like the ripples of water. The body of the masked man in gray split open from the waist. He fell to the ground with a bang. Blood splashed out and dyed a large area of the grassland red as he tumbled. A chi transformation realm expert died. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 125. The smell of blood was thick and pervaded the air, spreading out continuously. Pieces of burnt ash could be seen on the ground. There was also a corpse that had been cut in half at the waist. Organs and intestines mixed with blood and body. Fluids flowed all over the ground. However, if one looked closely, they would discover that the cut was very smooth. In the long and narrow eyes of the masked man, there was unconcealable shock and disbelief. There were also traces of fear and unwillingness, as well as a touch of dead ash. It appeared very complicated when mixed together. Chu Mu leaped over the two halves of the corpse. Like a gust of wind, he arrived at the edge of the cliff. He paused and lowered his head to look at the bottom of the cliff. There were wisps of clouds spiraling around it. It was bottomless. Just now, Xiao Qianfeng had fallen from this place. At this moment, there was no trace of him. Standing at the edge of the cliff, a gust of wind blew over and blew onto Chu Mu's body, causing his black hair to flutter in the wind and his tattered clothes to flutter. The wind caused the clouds in the cliff to fluctuate and surge, as if a terrifying enormous monster was swallowing and spitting at the bottom of the cliff. Chu Mu seemed to have become a statue. However, there were thousands of thoughts in his mind. No one had expected that his journey with Xiao Qianfeng would end like this. Xiao Qianfeng, I believe that you won't die just like this. I will wait for our next meeting. Withdrawing his gaze, the depth in his eyes was restrained. His gaze became clear again, and there was also a trace of expectation. Immediately, a burst of anger erupted in Chu Mu's heart and filled his chest. If it weren't for this masked man, he would still be traveling with Xiao Qianfeng to the Li Province Sword Academy. In a flash, Chu Mu appeared in front of the masked man's upper body like a gust of wind. Looking at the man's eyes that were filled with a complicated expression, he lightly flicked the fake, clear wind sword and directly lifted the black cloth, revealing a horse face with sunken cheeks. This was an unfamiliar face, so Chu Mu couldn't tell anything from it. He squatted down and searched through this fellow's clothes, finding a few things. Then he kicked the two halves of the guy's body and sent it flying down the cliff, leaving only a pool of blood. Even if someone who knew the truth saw it, they wouldn't know who left the blood behind. There were a total of 2 bottles of medicinal pills. One bottle contained great blood-clotting pills, and the other bottle contained great chi recovery pills. Other than that, there was nothing else that could prove his identity. Other than the Qinglan sword sect, I can't think of anyone else who would send a chi transformation realm expert to kill me. Chu Mu took out a few large chi recovery pills and threw them into his mouth. He put away the rest and stood up. As for the damage to his meridians caused by using the Xiantian sword chi, he could only slowly recover in the future. His eyes turned to Qinglan Mountain, as if he could see through the void with a trace of murderous intent. However, you would never have thought that this Chi transformation realm cultivator would not only fail to kill me, but also die under my sword. Within 10 years, I will fulfill my promise and challenge the Qinglan sword sect. Those who deserve to die will not be spared. Chu Mu's tone had a kind of absolute determination. It was full of the sharpness of a sword, showing his unparalleled determination. He picked up the fake sword of the Qi transformation realm expert. In the low-grade sword sect, not every Qi transformation realm expert had a real sword to use. Only those at the elder level could have it. He walked to the bag he had thrown far away, opened it, and took out new clothes to change into and tidied up a little. However, his black hair was a little curly because of the attack of the fiery, red, Xiantian sword Qi. It looked a little strange. Fortunately, this time, I didn't go with eldest senior brother. Otherwise, there would be unnecessary deaths and injuries. However, I don't know if the Qinglan sword sect sent other Qi transformation realm experts to deal with eldest senior brother other than me and Xiao Qianfeng. With the 2 fake swords on his back and the fake clear wind sword in his left hand, he put the bag on his back again. This time he was alone and didn't have any companions. Carrying a bit of worry for Li Yi's group, Chu Mu started walking again. After a period of time, Chu Mu left the cliff area. He walked a little further and walked into a wide road. Remote roads often seemed quiet and there were very few people walking on them. However, once he reached the main road, there were more people walking on it. Not long after Chu Mu walked onto the main road, he encountered a carriage coming from the opposite direction. It stirred up a cloud of dust as it sped away. This was an unrelated person. Chu Mu only glanced at it from afar and didn't pay it any attention. Not long after, another sound came from not far behind him. According to Chu Mu's senses, it was about a few dozen meters behind him. There were exactly 5 people. Sure enough, not long after, the sound behind him gradually became louder, indicating that the people behind him were gradually catching up. Chu Mu's ears moved slightly, and he judged the walking posture and movements of the 5 people behind him based on his listening sword. It was said that the perfected listening sword could clearly and accurately reproduce the source of the sound. However, the current Chu Mu was still unable to do this. Because he was using listening sword, Chu Mu's speed was not fast. Not long after, the 5 people surpassed Chu Mu. Chu Mu could clearly feel that their gazes stayed on him for a few breaths of time. Chu Mu could even feel that there was a sharp gaze that stayed on his hand and the fake sword on his back for the longest time. Because these 5 people were already in front of Chu Mu could naturally see them. There were 4 men and 1 woman, and they all had swords on their backs. Judging from their backs and their side profile, they were not too old nor too young. They were probably in their 20s. Through the Qi observation technique, Chu Mu also found that their sword Qi cultivation was only at the 9th stage, while some were at the 10th stage. The most powerful one, according to Chu Mu's judgment, should be at the middle of the 10th stage. It seems that they are scattered swordsmen. Chu Mu secretly said. In their 20s, they were only at the 9th or 10th stage of sword Qi cultivation. Only a group of scattered swordsmen. Otherwise, if they were disciples of a sword faction, they should not be at this level. At the same time that Chu Mu made a judgment on them, their discussion also turned to Chu Mu's side and they whispered, "That swordsman just now was so young. I guess he was only 17 or 18 years old. Well, at most 20 years old, much younger than us. But his cultivation, I used Qi observation technique and found that he was at the early 10th stage, just a little bit worse than me. What? He is so young and has the early 10th stage of sword Qi cultivation. That is much more powerful than us. It seems that he should be a disciple of a sword faction. I really envy him. A disciple of a sword faction is really extraordinary. But he actually has 3 swords on him. That is really strange. Everyone, as a 10th stage disciple of a sword faction, his identity is definitely not bad. Maybe he has some secret manuals or pills on him. And I just noticed that the swords in his hands and on his body are not ordinary swords. They seem to be 3 pseudo-swords. What? Pseudo-swords? Yes, they are pseudo-swords. I was lucky enough to see them before. He is only one person, and his cultivation is at the early 10th stage. Should we? No, a sword faction disciple is not ordinary. If we can't kill him, I am afraid that in the future he will take revenge. Well, there is no need to say more. Some things just need to be thought about. Gradually, they went further and further away. Little did they know that their whispers were clearly transmitted to Chumu's ears. Fortunately, they did not make up their minds to make a move on Chumu. Otherwise, they would only add to the 5 dead souls under Chumu's sword. For Chumu, these 5 people were just passing by. They were unable to leave any trace in his heart. While walking, he used listening sword to listen to the sounds coming from all around. The sound of the wind blowing, the footsteps of people walking, the sound of sand and stones being blown, the sound of leaves swaying in the wind, etc. The sounds of the whole world were intertwined with each other. In Chumu's ears, they were clearly separated. While walking, Chumu's eyes naturally closed. It was like a person who was tired to a certain extent, unable to control himself. In a split second, the world in front of his eyes disappeared under the closed eyelids, returning to darkness. It was as if everything had fallen into a deep sleep, returning to silence. After that, another exciting scene appeared. Chumu's ears became more sensitive. His hearing increased greatly in an instant, as if he had swept away layers of obstacles. The whole world, in another form, was displayed in Chumu's ears. He listened to the world. Chumu's footsteps, unconsciously, came to a stop. He stood motionless by the side of the road. His aura had completely stilled, as if he had become a statue. The wind continued to blow, causing the leaves to rustle. It blew the dust on the road into the air. It blew the grass on the side of the road up and down, like waves. It blew Chumu's black hair and clothes, but it did not move Chumu's body, nor did it move Chumu's mind. Time passed bit by bit. The sun that was emitting warm light gradually set in the west, turning into a blazing fireball. The red afterglow scattered across the earth, leaving behind a residual heat. Chumu's body seemed to be covered in a layer of red gauze, but his body was nailed to the ground like a nail. His body was as straight as a sword, pointing to the sky. Occasionally, people would pass by and look at Chumu in surprise. They pointed at him, not understanding just what was going on with Chumu. However, ordinary people were in awe of swordsmen. They did not dare to disturb Chumu. As for the swordsmen passing by, almost all of them were swordsmen. Therefore, when they used the aura observation technique to look at Chumu, they either could not see through Chumu's cultivation, or they could see that Chumu was at the early 10th stage. They knew that Chumu was definitely a disciple of some sword faction. Even if he was only a disciple of a low-grade sword faction, it was still not an existence that swordsmen like them could contend against. Therefore, in order to avoid trouble, they did not go near Chumu or even disturb Chumu. However, there were always exceptions. There were 2 middle-aged swordsmen with gloomy looks who came from afar. They followed the crowd's line of sight and fell on Chumu's body. When some of the swordsmen saw these 2 gloomy middle-aged swordsmen, their expressions changed. A hint of fear flashed through their eyes, and they quickly retreated. Early 10th stage cultivation? It seems that he is a disciple of some sword faction. It seems that he has entered a state of cultivation. One of them said to himself. Soon after, he sneered. It seems that he is a rookie who has just left the sword faction to gain experience. He actually entered a state of cultivation in this kind of place. He is really reckless. Boss, I will take the opportunity to kill this guy. I believe that he must have a lot of good things on him. The other person said. He turned into a sharp arrow and shot toward Chumu. He pulled out his sword in midair. A clanging sound rang out. The sharp sword was mixed with a snow-white sword light. It was fierce and murderous. The wind whistled. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 126. A series of exclamations rang out. This gloomy middle-aged man had the sword Chi cultivation of the middle 10th phase. At this moment he made his move. The 100 refined sword in his hand emitted an incomparably sharp killing intent that completely locked onto Chu Mu, who had his eyes closed. His sword Chi surged. This sword was merciless. It had an earth-shattering power that wanted to kill Chu Mu on the spot. This caused many of the scattered swordsmen to reveal shocked expressions. If any of you dare to leak any information, be careful of your own head. The other gloomy middle-aged man revealed a cold smile full of threat and murderous intent. He looked around, and his sharp eyes swept across the faces of the scattered swordsmen around him like a viper, and he threatened. Everyone hurriedly suppressed their exclamations. Their expressions changed greatly as they continuously retreated. Some even immediately turned around and left. It seemed that these two gloomy middle-aged men had a great background. Seeing that the sword that was filled with killing intent was already close to him, and that in the next second it might pierce through his throat and cause blood to splatter, the surrounding onlookers could not help but narrow their pupils, revealing faces of shock and pity. The gloomy middle-aged swordsman who attacked already had a smile of victory on his face. He believed that in the next moment his sword would pierce through the throat of this silly sword faction disciple. He would also hear the beautiful sound of the sword piercing through the throat. In the blink of an eye, there were even some people who could not help but close their eyes. They only felt their vision blur. The gloomy middle-aged man's sure-kill sword actually strangely missed. The airflow and various sounds brought about by the sword were all clearly felt by Chu Mu. Subconsciously, his body reacted instinctively and dodged the sword. He actually avoided it. A series of low cries sounded, filled with disbelief. The gloomy middle-aged man's face became even gloomier. This sword that he was completely confident in was actually avoided. Moreover, it was avoided by a rookie whose cultivation was lower than his. This made him extremely angry. Even though he was angry, he did not lose his mind. His sword Chi surged and let out a roar. The sword rolled up a faint green color and blew out a strong wind. The power of this sword strike was even stronger than the previous one. After all, he thought that Chu Mu wouldn't be able to sense his previous attack and that it would be easy for him to kill him. Therefore, he only used the strength of his body to swing his sword and didn't use much of his sword chi. However, after being dodged by Chu Mu, he felt embarrassed and didn't hold back his sword chi. Chu Mu frowned slightly when he sensed the other party's piercingly cold, killing intent surging towards him. However, his eyes remained closed. He was still immersed in the world of listening to the sword and had yet to awaken. However, his body reacted naturally. His right hand grabbed the hilt of the sword with lightning speed and pulled it out in an instant. A clanging sound rang out like the collision of divine metals from outer space. A faint green sword light that contained a cold and sharp killing intent swept through the air like a cool breeze brushing past one's face. This strange contradiction caused the gloomy middle-aged swordsman's expression to change. His eyes seemed to blur for a moment, and his sword seemed to have encountered some kind of invisible obstruction. It paused slightly, almost imperceptibly. This slight pause, which couldn't be detected from the outside, was enough to change the entire situation. Chu Mu's fake clear-wind sword was close to the gloomy middle-aged swordsman's 100 refined sword. In the instant that the gloomy middle-aged swordsman was in a daze, Chu Mu's sword lightly touched his throat. A terrifying killing intent immediately pierced through his throat and went through his entire neck. Sheathing his sword, Chu Mu's figure once again returned to stillness, as if he had never moved. However, the gloomy middle-aged swordsman maintained his posture of thrusting out his sword, pointing directly at Chu Mu. However, he seemed to be frozen and motionless. His eyes quickly turned white, and a touch of death spread across his face. There were remnants of fear and disbelief. At his throat, a scarlet color spread, and blood quickly spread out. "He's dead! He's dead!" Immediately, when someone saw clearly, there was a commotion. The other gloomy middle-aged swordsman's face was filled with killing intent. His gloomy face seemed to be about to drip water. One of his hands gripped the hilt of his sword as if he wanted to grab it. The veins on the back of his hand bulged out. He gritted his teeth. His heart was filled with pain and anger at the same time. It was as if lava from a volcano was about to erupt. He wanted to immediately pull out his sword and kill the person in front of him. However, he didn't dare. In his heart, other than anger and pain, there was also fear. His cultivation was about the same as that of his brother who was killed. They were both in the middle of the 10th stage. Their swordsmanship was about the same. However, his brother was killed by a single sword strike. In other words, if he attacked, he would also be killed. Damn little bastard. No matter what sword sect you are from, you killed my brother. You must die. You must die. Letting out a beast-like roar, the gloomy middle-aged swordsman quickly turned around and ran away in large strides before Chumu woke up. His figure disappeared in a flash. Only a few scattered swordsmen were left looking at each other. They were unable to hide the shock in their eyes. After a few breaths of time, Chumu's eyes slowly opened. His eyes clearly reflected the figures around him. Chumu's face flashed with a hint of confusion. Soon after, when his gaze landed on the gloomy middle-aged man's face, Chumu thought for a moment. Only then did he understand the cause and effect. He couldn't help but sneer inwardly. Although he had just entered a special state, this special state that could only be encountered by chance and not by searching for caused his listening to sword to go from near Deshang to near Deshang. And in this state, everything in the body was handed over to instinct. It seemed that the person in front of him wanted to take this opportunity to kill him. Instead, he died under his instinctive counterattack. Regarding this, Chumu didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. It was normal to want to kill someone and be killed. You come here. What exactly happened here? Even though he understood the cause and effect, he only knew that the gloomy middle-aged swordsman wanted to kill him. As for everything else, Chumu didn't know. The scattered swordsman who was called out trembled all over. His face paled and he had a cowering appearance. He regretted that he didn't leave as soon as possible. Why did he stupidly stay? However, after personally witnessing such an inconceivable thing happen, he didn't have any thoughts of escaping. His voice trembled as he explained. As for Chumu, he listened without saying a word. His expression didn't change in the slightest, but there was a glimmer of light in his eyes. The two of them are consecrators of White Maple City's King Snake Gang. They both have the cultivation of the middle 10th phase. The King Snake Gang is the largest faction in White Maple City. They are extremely powerful and domineering. Legend has it that there are many Chi transformation realm experts in their gang. This time, you killed one of them and the other escaped. He will definitely bring people to take revenge on you. The scattered swordsman's voice gradually became fluent as he explained. He hurriedly said, "The best way is for you to quickly leave here and return to the sword sect. No matter how strong the King Snake Gang is, they won't dare to go against the sword sect." "Oh, you can leave." Chumu, who understood everything, nodded slightly and said indifferently, "I advise you to immediately return to the sword sect." The scattered swordsman seemed to have forgotten his previous fear and was about to talk nonstop. However, Chumu casually glanced at him. Immediately, his indifferent gaze was like a basin of ice water being poured over him. The scattered swordsman's expression changed greatly. He hurriedly shut his mouth and immediately turned to leave. Chi Transformation Realm Expert? No, to Chumu, Chi Transformation Realm experts could only be considered experts. They couldn't be called experts. Especially not long ago, he had personally killed a Chi Transformation Realm swordsman. although that was under the circumstances of him and Xiao Qianfeng working together. It allowed Chu Mu to understand the strength of the qi transformation realm. At the same time, he also had a more direct understanding of the qi transformation realm. Although the current him wasn't a match for a qi transformation realm swordsman one-on-one, it was not enough to make him feel fear. Perhaps returning to the Qingfeng sword sect was an extremely safe method, but that wasn't Chu Mu's choice. A swordsman should have a sharp edge. This sharp edge was always contained within the heart and the body. This sharp edge that belonged to a swordsman had already fused into the blood, into the bone marrow, into the mind, into the will, and into the soul. It wasn't just the sharp edge of a swordsman, but also the sharp edge of a swordmaster. It was the overlapping sharp edge that mixed the souls of two different space-time. A true swordsman should be fearless, pressing forward with an indomitable will, cutting through all obstacles. Shrinking back would only cause the sharp edge to be damaged. In the end, it would become dull and desolate. This was a kind of decisiveness that came from knowing that there were tigers on the mountain, but still going to the tiger's mountain. It was an incomparable persistence of spirit and will. It was condensed into a sword that would rather break than yield, and neither yield nor give up. In that instant, Chu Mu only felt that his mind was unprecedentedly clear. It was as if all the impurities had been expelled. It was as if a piece of stubborn iron had been continuously forged at high temperatures, removing the impurities within it bit by bit. As his mind was tempered and refined, Chu Mu could feel that his soul seemed to become even more pure. It was an extremely peculiar feeling. It was as if the previous him and the soul of the original owner of this body were not complete enough. Then, in the following days, bit by bit, they constantly merged into one. Until this time, under the coercion of all kinds of pressure, the sharp edge that was contained in the heart of his body was forced out. It directly strangled the impurities on the surface of his mind, purified his soul, and promoted the two different souls to achieve a true and complete fusion. Chu Mu suddenly felt that all the air around him seemed to have become clearer. Even if he didn't deliberately pay attention to it, he could feel the fluctuations more clearly. It was so much so that a sharp aura was being nurtured from the depths of his body. It was slowly revealing its lofty and domineering aura. This aura gradually leaked out, causing the scattered swordsmen not far away to feel oppressed and suffocated. In their eyes, Chu Mu's figure seemed to have become taller, as if he had suddenly grown to a height of 10 meters. Moreover, he exuded an incomparably sharp and domineering aura, oppressing them. It was as high as an unattainable mountain, turning into a sword mountain. Huff! Huff! The scattered swordsmen's faces turned pale. Their eyes bulged, and their throats unconsciously squirmed, making strange sounds. Their limbs were weak, and their blood seemed to be about to solidify. What's more, their whole bodies were like boneless snakes, softly falling to the ground, unable to move. They foamed at the mouth and looked like they were on the verge of death. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 127. Too terrifying. The group of independent swordsmen trembled, their faces pale and their eyes full of fear. Who is he? Which sword sect is he from? He can actually suppress us to the point that we can't move with just his aura. If he wants to kill us, wouldn't he be able to do it in the blink of an eye? I'm guessing that he's at least a disciple of a middle-grade sword sect, or possibly a disciple of a high-grade sword sect. If he's a disciple of a low-grade sword sect, he definitely wouldn't have such an aura. The independent swordsmen all breathed a sigh of relief as they stared at Chu Mu's departing figure. They all guessed. The shock and fear in their hearts were still intense. After several months, Listening Sword has finally reached Deshang. Unfortunately, it's extremely difficult to reach perfection. After leaving, Chu Mu maintained a steady pace as he moved forward. According to his understanding, there was a city on the right in front of him. It was White Maple City. However, Chumu had no intention of entering the city. He wanted to go all the way to the Liz Ho Sword Academy. After several months of comprehension, Half-Step Sword Force has finally reached perfection under the pressure of the Chi transformation stage. It's only a fine line away from entry. In addition, there's also external sword Chi. With the complete fusion of the soul, the range of control has also reached 8 meters. At this time, the sun was setting in the west. Because it was early spring, night came quickly and it was soon dark. Chumu hurried on for a while. The night was dark and the stars filled the sky. He stopped beside a forest and casually glanced at it. He leaped up and used his movement technique to land on a thick tree trunk as if he was in the sky. He put down his bag, took out some dry rations and a water bottle, and ate just like that. These things were all prepared by Li Wei and were enough to last him for several days. Before he finished eating, Chumu basically didn't need to enter the city to replenish his rations. After finishing the rations, Chumu leaned against a tree trunk and closed his eyes to rest. He planned to stay here for the night and continue his journey as soon as the sun rose. At this moment, in the distance, a flame suddenly flickered and light footsteps could be heard, causing Chumu's ears to twitch. His eyes abruptly opened and emitted a sharp light that shot into the void and forced the darkness to retreat as he stared straight ahead. In their line of sight, through the sparse leaves and in the dark night, they could see many flickering flames flying towards them. That was the light from the burning torches, and with the help of that light, they could vaguely see some figures flickering. His speed is very fast. He should be using a movement skill to come here. Could it be? Chumu's eyes flashed with a bright light. Then he restrained it and made a guess. The sword Chi in his dantian was mobilized and slowly flowed in his meridians. His right index finger subconsciously flicked gently, and the air seemed to have become the strings of a zither. Quick, quick, quick! That damned little bastard shouldn't have gone far. Quickly find him and kill him. He has a fake sword on him and must have other treasures. A hurried voice full of murderous intent sounded. It was sharp and tore through the darkness. Sure enough, it's the King Snake Gang. Chumu was completely sure. A trace of gloominess flashed in his eyes. The flicking finger of his right hand suddenly stopped, and the breath of his whole body was restrained. His whole person seemed to be integrated with the tree. Previously, I used the Xiantian sword Qi to kill the Qi-forming swordsmen of the Qinglan sword sect. But because the Xiantian sword Qi was too fierce and overbearing, it caused damage to my meridians. Now I can only use 50% of my sword Qi cultivation. Otherwise, it will worsen the damage to my meridians. Deep in thought, Chumu made a decision. At the same time, the shining fire was approaching, flashing under the trunk. Chumu glanced over and found that there were a total of dozens of figures. More than a dozen figures exuded a breath fluctuation that was at least at the peak of the 9th stage, and half of them had reached the 10th stage. The other dozens of people were all at the 8th or 7th stage of cultivation, presumably at the level of the gang members. Although it was only a glimpse, such a lineup made Chumu's heart tremble slightly. Perhaps in his heyday he could deal with 1 or 2 of them and kill them one by one. But now he could only use 50% of his cultivation, which was greatly reduced. Even if he could kill all of them in the end, he estimated that he would suffer some injuries, or even die if he was not careful. After a while, the fire quickly went away. Chumu breathed a sigh of relief, but he did not relax his vigilance and still restrained his breath. Sure enough, not long after, there were actually more than 20 figures that quickly returned in the dark night. They did not make a sound, nor did they use torches. But Chumu looked at the sword Deshang. This kind of darkness, which would affect a normal 10th stage sword practitioner, did not hinder him in the slightest, as if it was daytime. I can't find him. This guy, could it be that he can fly? The 20 or so people stopped by the tree under Chumu and discussed in low voices. Strange, according to logic an early 10th stage sword practitioner, even if he used all his strength to rush back, would not just disappear without a trace. This voice carried a bit of doubt. Little did they know the person they were talking about was right above them. As long as they looked up and carefully looked, they might be able to find him. This damned little bastard, no matter what, we have to find him. Not only did he kill my little brother, he has an irreconcilable enmity with me. He also has 3 fake swords on him, and maybe other treasures. A voice that was gnashing teeth and full of hatred shouted in a low voice. What? 3 fake swords? Are you sure it's 3 and not 1? A hurried and shocked voice suddenly shouted, shaking the darkness. Yes, it's 3 fake swords. This gloomy middle-aged man, who was anxious to find Chu Mu and kill him, braced himself and said in a certain tone. In fact, he could only be sure that the sword in Chu Mu's hand was a fake sword. As for the 2 swords on his back, it was hard to say whether they were fake swords or not. But since he had already blurted it out, he could only brace himself and continue lying. The value of a fake sword was very high, and the value of 3 fake swords was even higher. Good. Even if there are no other treasures, just the 3 fake swords are a great harvest. The shout from before carried traces of excitement. As a high-ranking member of the King Snake Gang, he naturally knew that even the powerful Chi transformation stage swordsmen in the gang used fake swords. As for the 10th stage swordsmen, most of them only used 100 refinement swords. Of course, that was because the 100 refined swords had been strengthened. They were tougher and more durable than normal 100 refined swords, but they were still incomparable to fake swords. In my opinion, the night is dark and not suitable for tracking. Why don't we gather our men here and wait until daybreak to distinguish the various traces and track him down? Another voice sounded with a hint of calmness. Executive Lee's tracking techniques are famous in White Maple City. Good. Then we'll follow Executive Lee's suggestion. Chu Mu frowned slightly. With the help of the night, he could indeed hide from the pursuit of these people by restraining his aura. But once daybreak, without the cover of the night, he would be easily discovered. At that time, once the dozens of people gathered to form an encirclement, he would have to pay a heavy price to break out. I can only take this opportunity to leave before they completely gather. I can use the night to escape. Chu Mu thought to himself. His aura was still restrained, but the upper origin sword chi in his body was slowly circulating. The Xiantian sword chi in the center of his dantian was also naturally condensing. However, since there are people who specialize in tracking, I should first kill them. Otherwise, even if I escape from the encirclement, I will be pursued again. Chu Mu thought to himself. His right hand slowly grasped the hilt of the fake, clear wind sword, but he did not pull it out. Chu Mu's killing intent was also restrained like his aura, not leaking out in the slightest. His sharpness and sharpness were constantly brewing in his body and mind, trying to catch them off guard and kill them in one strike. Furthermore, he had to think of all sorts of escape routes. He constantly adjusted his mind, chi and spirit to the best state. His mind and body synchronized, the sharpness and sharpness condensed into the shape of a sword. In an instant, Chu Mu seemed to have merged with the sword in his hand. His body also became like a huge sword, releasing a terrifying aura. Sharpness, sharpness, majesty, vastness, and tyranny. It was like a tall mountain, like a turbulent sea, rolling over and crushing everything, shaking the void. In an instant, the 20 or so people under the tree only felt a heavenly might descend, crushing their bodies. They were unable to move. It was as if their blood had frozen. The air was still, and they were unable to breathe. Their bodies and limbs were suppressed, and they felt powerless. Immediately after, a cold light tore through the darkness, piercing through the sky like lightning. It was like a rainbow slashing over. The sharp killing intent condensed into a line, causing people's skin to feel a piercing pain, as if it was being torn apart. Their mouths were wide open, but they were unable to make any sound. Their eyes were filled with fear. This extremely sharp sword light filled their eyes, and the surrounding darkness completely retreated. Taking them by surprise, Chumu first released his sword aura to intimidate everyone. Then he used his thunderous sword attack. In an instant, he was like an arrow leaving the bough as he flew down from the tree. The killing intent on the fake clear wind sword was so condensed that it almost became solid. Without any obstruction, Chumu's sword slashed across the neck of the consecrator Li. Borrowing the force of the attack, he turned around in midair and slashed his sword again. The cold and sharp sword once again slashed across the necks of 5 swordsmen. Shortly after, he heavily stomped on the head of one of the swordsmen. With a cracking sound, the neck of the swordsman was directly broken. Chumu once again transformed into an arrow, leaving the bough, and shot up the tree trunk. He fully used the wandering in the wind movement technique and quickly flew into the distance. He escaped into the small forest and used the tree trunk to get away. It wasn't until Chumu was far away and his figure disappeared that the remaining people finally reacted. They were instantly furious. Chase him immediately. No matter what, we have to catch this damned bastard and punish him with 100 swords. A flustered and exasperated voice was filled with killing intent and anger as he roared. However, they found that their bodies were still weak. They'd barely managed to rush forward a few steps and almost fell. They had no choice but to stop and rest. Damned bastard, he was hiding in the tree and eavesdropping on our conversation. He even dared to kill so many of us. If we don't catch him, pull out his tendons, and skin him alive, it will be difficult to resolve the hatred in my heart. It's night right now, so he definitely can't run far. You guys immediately return to the gang and mobilize more people. The rest of you, gather up and chase after him with me. No matter what, we can't let this little bastard go. The swordsmen that Chumu had just killed were all 9th and 10th phase swordsmen. There were 6 of them in total. This kind of loss was not small for the King Snake Gang. At least in the past 10 years, the King Snake Gang had not suffered such a loss. Therefore, between the King Snake Gang and Chumu, it was not just a simple conflict of interests, but a clear hatred, to be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 128. A few months ago, Chumu's wind concept had reached 30%. A few months later, although he did not break through to 40%, his comprehension of the wind concept had improved. At this time, he fully exerted 30% of the wind concept and integrated it into the wind travel movement. Chumu's speed was extremely fast, like a ghost under the night sky. Deshang's sword could ignore such a deep night, and in his eyes it was as if it was daytime. Many trees seemed to rush at him. Not only did they not cause any obstruction to Chumu, but they also became his leverage, making him escape faster. Using a sword aura that nears the beginner level to oppress, and then using a thunderous slash. Unfortunately, if it wasn't for the fact that the movement of the sword aura reached the limit of my damaged meridians, I could have killed even more people. While using his movement technique to quickly leave, Chumu thought to himself. He originally expected that after his meridians were injured, his sword chi cultivation would be limited by 50%. But when he really started to fight, he found that the limit was as much as 60%. The sword chi transport that killed the 5 people made his meridians feel a stabbing pain. If it was transported again, it was bound to make the injured meridians more difficult to recover. The people of the King Snake Gang will certainly not give up. I'll let my meridians recover as I go. Unfortunately, the Great Recovery Pill and the Great Hemostasis Pill have no effect on the injury of the meridians. While secretly thinking, Chumu had already gone deep into the woods. The range of the woods was not large, so there were no fierce beasts living inside. Not long after, Chumu had already crossed the whole forest and in front of him was a mountain. Recalling the topographic map that he had seen before leaving the sword faction, Chumu knew that this mountain was called White Maple Mountain, and that was how White Maple City got its name. In terms of height, White Maple Mountain was not as high as Qinglan Mountain, but it was wider. However, the spirit qi was obviously not as abundant as Qinglan Mountain. Therefore, the ferocious beasts that lived on White Maple Mountain could not compare to the ferocious beasts of Qinglan Mountain in terms of both quantity and strength. Similarly, there were no sword sects in White Maple Mountain. The main forces were concentrated in White Maple City. After all, White Maple Mountain was not far from White Maple City. Chumu remembered that if he crossed the White Maple Mountain, he would be even closer to the Li province. If he went around it, he would have to travel even further. He immediately decided to cross the White Maple Mountain. Firstly, it would shorten the time, and secondly, it would be easier to avoid the pursuit of the King Snake Gang. After all, there were quite a few experts in the Qi transformation realm in the King Snake Gang. Once they took action, Chumu alone would not be a match for them. In the end, he still needed to rely on his cultivation and his unfathomable swordsmanship in order to be invincible. Otherwise, he would still have to restrain himself when he needed to restrain himself. Taking advantage of the night, Chu Mu quickly flew towards White Maple Mountain. The rugged mountain rocks were not an obstacle to Chu Mu. Naturally, he also tried his best to avoid leaving any traces. However, he had not studied tracking and anti-tracking techniques, so it was inevitable that he would leave some traces. However, Chu Mu did not care about this. What he cared about was the pursuit of the swordsman in the Qi transformation realm. As for those below the Qi transformation realm, even if they were half-step to the Qi transformation realm, Chu Mu was confident that he could escape unscathed even if he was no match for them. I hope the people of the King Snake Gang know what's good for them. If they chase after me, then there will be more dead souls under my sword. Chu Mu ran all the way until he was halfway up the mountain in one breath. At this time, it was already the second half of the night. Chu Mu scanned his surroundings and found a huge rock that was away from the wind. He sat down cross-legged and did not sleep. Instead, he began to cultivate the Shangyuan Sword Qi incantation. Cultivating the Sword Qi incantation was a process that consumed one's mental strength. The higher the grade of the Sword Qi incantation, the purer the Sword Qi cultivated. Therefore, one's mental strength had to be even more concentrated when cultivating the Sword Qi. However, at the same time, this was also a process of tempering one's mental strength and mental strength. Although the effects were not obvious each time and were almost undetectable, after many years, the effects would gradually become obvious. Generally speaking, every time he cultivated, he would consume a lot of his spiritual will. However, Chu Mu was different from normal swordsmen. His soul had gone through the complete fusion before and had become even stronger and purer. His mind was full and his willpower was powerful. This kind of consumption, as long as it wasn't continuous for a few days and nights, basically wouldn't make him feel tired. Because his meridians had not recovered from the injury, Chu Mu deliberately slowed down the speed of cultivating the Shangyuan Sword Qi. Time passed slowly as the Shangyuan Sword Qi circulated. In White Maple City, the King Snake Gang was brightly lit. A large number of people moved out, attracting the attention of other forces in the city and secretly investigating. The sky was slightly bright. Chu Mu woke up from his cultivation. He opened his eyes that were as clear as water. There were traces of light flowing in them, but they were soon restrained. He opened his mouth slightly and exhaled a mouthful of white, turbid breath. It condensed into a flying sword and shot out more than 2 meters. It hit the ground and seemed to shatter it. However, there was also a small hole in the ground. It was said that when a swordsman's sword qi cultivation reached a certain level, a casual breath could penetrate a mountain rock. It was very terrifying. Looking down the mountain, there was no movement. This meant that the King Snake Gang had either given up or had not caught up. Thinking about it, it should be the second possibility. Chu Mu did not plan to stay any longer. He got up and used his movement technique, flying towards the top of White Maple Mountain. 2 hours later, Chu Mu had already reached the top of the mountain. At this moment, the sun shone brightly, covering the entire mountain in a layer of light golden-red gauze. It was dazzling and gorgeous. Standing at the top of the mountain, there was a heroic feeling of looking down on all the other mountains. Chu Mu only felt that his mind seemed to have become infinitely distant, piercing through the clouds and ignoring all obstacles. Suddenly, he felt 2 unusual auras. They were very obscure. If it were not for the fact that Chu Mu seemed to have merged with the world at that moment, he would not have sensed them at all. Following his senses, Chu Mu looked in a certain direction. After a moment of thought, he used his movement technique and quickly headed in that direction. He was quickly heading towards the other side of the White Maple Mountain. It was the same idea as Chu Mu when he crossed the White Maple Mountain. After flying for a while, he entered a dense forest. The feeling of the aura was faintly discernible, but it was much clearer than before. He suddenly stopped, and his entire body went from extreme movement to extreme stillness. He stopped on a meter-tall green rock and looked ahead. Chu Mu's gaze became extremely sharp. In his eyes, there were 2 people dozens of meters ahead. The surrounding ground was filled with countless cracks. The shortest one was 10 meters long, and the longest one was 100 meters long. It was a shocking sight. One of them was wearing a silver robe that was torn and tattered. His hair was disheveled, and he was in a sorry state. He was half lying on a half-meter-tall green rock. He wore a bracelet on his left hand, which hung down powerlessly. His right hand was holding a silver-white sword with great effort. The other person was facing the silver-clothed person from a distance of 20 meters. He was lying on the ground, wearing a black robe. His hair was also disheveled. His left hand was also holding onto the ground with great effort, as if he wanted to get up. His right hand was also holding onto a pitch-black sword with great effort. When Chu Mu's gaze fell on the silver and pitch-black swords, his pupils unconsciously shrank to the size of needles. His heart was in turmoil. The silver sword was a bit thinner than normal swords, while the pitch-black sword was a bit narrower than normal swords. Swords! These are definitely swords! A voice roared in Chu Mu's heart. Then, Chu Mu understood even more clearly. A true sword could only be used by a swordsman who was at least in the Qi transformation realm. In other words, although the silver-clothed person and the black-clothed person looked like they were in their 20s or 30s, they were at least Qi transformation realm swordsmen. As for what level they were in, it was impossible to know. The silver-clothed person and the black-clothed person were not dead. Chu Mu's appearance had attracted their attention. They immediately turned their heads, and their gazes fell on Chu Mu. The 2 people's eyes were incomparably fierce. When they fell on Chu Mu's face, Chu Mu immediately felt waves of piercing pain. His mental remembrance was also shaken, and his body uncontrollably swayed slightly. The silver-clothed person's sharp gaze contained a kind of transcendence that could see through everything. It was as if nothing could escape his calculations. The black-clothed person's sharp gaze contained a kind of bloody darkness. It was incomparably evil and chilling. In an instant, Chu Mu became extremely vigilant. Sword Qi surged out, and the sword Qi around him fluctuated slightly. If there was even the slightest bit of danger, he would attack with all his strength. However, the silver-clothed person and the black-clothed person only looked at Chu Mu. They did not move at all, as if they were too heavily injured. Chu Mu secretly let out a sigh of relief, but he still remained on high alert. "Kid, hurry up and kill this Zhugeming. There will be plenty of benefits for you." The black-clothed person was the first to speak. His voice was somewhat weak, but it was abnormally ruthless. His tone also carried a forceful command, as if Chu Mu was his subordinate. However, the silver-clothed person's expression did not change. He looked at Chu Mu as if he was confident. Although he was somewhat weak, he spoke neither slowly nor quickly. "Little brother, this person is a member of the Blood Sword Tower. His hands are stained with blood, and he has committed countless crimes. He has even cruelly killed thousands of civilians. Even the heavens will not tolerate this. Now that he is heavily injured, he is unable to fight back at all. This is the best time to kill him. Little brother, please do it and eliminate all evil." Chu Mu did not reply. Instead, he looked at the silver-clothed person a few times, and then at the black-clothed person a few times. In his heart, he had already made a judgment. His sword observation technique was nearing completion, and observing a sword was like observing a person. Although he could not see through his opponent's cultivation, he could roughly see through his opponent's character. Coupled with their expressions, tone, and other aspects, Chu Mu could already make a judgment. Immediately after, he drew his sword. With a flash of sword light, a ray of sword chi pierced through the air and shot towards the black-clothed person. "You." The black-clothed person's sharp and gloomy eyes shone with terrifying fury and killing intent. It was hard to imagine that an ant at the sword chi realm would actually dare to attack him. Unfortunately, he really was heavily injured, and he could not even use his innate sword chi. He struggled to dodge the sword chi, but it was difficult for him to do so. Immediately, the sword chi struck his body, tearing through his skin and causing blood to flow. "Damned ant, stop immediately. Otherwise, the Blood Sword Tower will hunt you down endlessly, including everyone related to you. They will all die." This threat that seemed to come from the depths of hell made Chu Mu's heart turn cold. A cold intent circled around him, and he could not help but tighten his grip on his sword. "Little brother, don't worry. The Blood Sword Tower is currently facing hunt. They can't even take care of themselves. As long as you kill him, nothing else will happen," the silver-clothed person said slowly. His voice seemed to contain a sliver of reassuring power. Regardless of whether it was the silver-clothed person's words or the black-clothed person's threat, Chu Mu had to act. Only by killing this black-clothed person would he be able to achieve the best result. As for the rest, it would depend on the situation. Chu Mu struck out again. This time he used the killing move, Golden Edge Shattering Space. The condensed, faint golden light disappeared into the void, and in the next second, it appeared at the black-clothed person's neck. The black-clothed person's eyes were filled with extreme fear, but with a soft sound, his neck was cut off by the faint golden light. The silver-clothed person was stunned at first, but then a hint of admiration flashed through his eyes. This young swordsman was so decisive and did not hesitate at all. Ordinary people could not compare to him. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 129. The man in black's neck did not roll after being severed by Chu Mu's void-ripping metal edge. It remained in its original state. Only a smear of scarlet appeared at the neck. Blood slowly seeped out. Strangely, the blood was black in color, different from that of a normal person. "Thank you for your help, little brother." The man in silver smiled faintly. He looked a little weak. "Please protect me for a moment, little brother." As he spoke, the silver-clothed person unexpectedly closed his eyes at ease. He wasn't the slightest bit worried that Chu Mu would attack him. One had to know that this was a Chi transformation realm swordsman. No matter what, he would have some good things on him. At the very least, his sword was a rare treasure. Chu Mu only glanced at the man in silver and nodded slightly. He looked at the corpse of the man in black. With a step, he appeared beside the corpse like a gust of wind. His gaze fell on the narrow, pitch-black longsword in the man's hand. This narrow, pitch-black longsword released a frightening wave of evil and bloody darkness. It was as if it had invaded Chu Mu's mind. He hurriedly shifted his gaze, and it happened to fall on the wrist of the man in black's left hand. This wrist was about the width of a pinky finger. It was the color of black metal, and there were many fine carvings on it. It looked 30% gorgeous and 70% simple. Chu Mu's gaze fell on the wrist for a while, but he could not tell what it was. It looked like a very ordinary accessory, but Chu Mu had a strange feeling in his heart. He subconsciously turned to look at the man in silver, and his gaze fell on the man in silver's left wrist. There was a similar wrist, and it was also the color of black metal. Upon closer inspection, regardless of size, shape, or the carvings on it, they were almost exactly the same. It was as if they had been made from the same mold in the same workshop. These two Qi transformation swordsmen were obviously from opposing factions. Could it be that they had the same hobby and were almost identical accessories? Chu Mu couldn't help but feel suspicious. He retracted his gaze and began to ponder. At this moment, the man in silver opened his eyes and glanced at Chu Mu. He didn't say anything and instead put down his sword. His right hand swiped across his left wrist, and a porcelain bottle appeared in his hand. He quickly opened the porcelain bottle, and a rich medicinal fragrance quickly spread out. A milky white pill the size of a longan appeared in the silver-clothed man's hand. He opened his mouth and inhaled. The pill seemed to automatically enter his mouth. After stuffing the cork, his right hand swiped the wrist of his left hand, and the porcelain bottle disappeared. The man in silver closed his eyes and shifted his body to sit cross-legged. He circulated the sword Qi art to refine the medicinal power of the pill. The entire process wasn't fast, and Chu Mu saw it clearly. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth was slightly agape. His face was full of shock, and his heart was in turmoil. It was as if a storm was raging in his brain. Space wrist. Chu Mu's throat was a little dry, as he spat out the words with difficulty. At the same time, a surge of joy surged through him. Even his resolute mind was momentarily lost. In the few months he had spent in the Azure Edge sword sect, he had gone through most of the records in the library. He remembered that one of the records had described a mysterious treasure. This kind of protection was not large and could not increase one's attack or defense. However, it had a function that everyone coveted. It had a small space inside that could store all kinds of items. However, the records had only mentioned a little about a treasure like the space wrist. Chu Mu had never seen a space wrist on the elders of the Azure Edge sword sect, the monastery master or Luo Tianxiong. This was enough to show how precious the space wrist was. However, he had seen two of such precious treasures right in front of him. For a moment, Chu Mu's breathing became a little ragged. A look of struggle flashed across Chu Mu's eyes. Immediately, a sharp sword light shot out, shattering the struggle and hesitation. His gaze became even purer and more resolute. Turning around, he bent down and took the space wrist from the black-clothed man's left hand, studying it carefully. Although he already knew what kind of treasure it was, there were too few records in the records, and Chu Mu did not know how to use it. After studying it carefully for a while, he only discovered that there seemed to be a silver-gray crystal the size of a soybean embedded in it. However, he did not know how to use it. He could only turn around and look at the silver-clothed man, waiting for him to finish cultivating before asking for guidance. The silver-clothed man knew all of his actions and struggles. Only after Chu Mu had eliminated the struggle and hesitation in his heart did the silver-clothed man truly relax and focus on refining the pill. Otherwise, even with the special nature of what he had learned, which allowed him to calculate things that ordinary people would not know, he would not dare to let his guard down completely when he was heavily injured. The facts proved that all of his calculations were correct. After a while, the silver-clothed man opened his eyes. He had finished regulating his breathing, and his face was much rosier. He quickly stood up and sheathed his sword. Looking at Chu Mu, he smiled faintly. "Thank you, little brother. Otherwise, I don't know when I would have been able to kill this bastard." "How do I use this space wrist?" Chu Mu nodded. He did not show any fear or restraint because of the difference in cultivation. Instead, he asked very calmly, He was very confident in his sword observation technique. He had never missed anything, and the silver-clothed man was clearly confident in what he had learned as well. Both of them behaved very calmly. You only need to drip your blood into the space wrist. After absorbing it, you'll be able to establish a connection with it. Then you can use it after you imprint your soul into it, explained the silver-clothed man. Chu Mu immediately cut his finger and squeezed out a drop of blood, dripping it onto the wrist. The blood was immediately absorbed by the patterns on the wrist and vanished. Subsequently, Chu Mu concentrated his mental intent, and it pierced through the void and landed on the wristband in his hand. In an instant, he entered it and felt as if his mind had entered another void. It was extremely strange. A sliver of a close connection appeared between the wristband in his hand and himself, as if it was an extension. The silver-clothed man was somewhat dumbstruck. Evidently, he didn't expect Chu Mu to recognize the spatial wristband as its master so quickly. He let out a slightly bitter laugh and said, "Under normal circumstances, only those whose cultivation reaches the Qi transformation realm can make the spatial wristband recognize them as its master. I didn't expect that, little brother, you who is only at the 10th phase of the sword aura realm, could do it." Chu Mu was slightly surprised when he heard that. Then he looked at the silver-clothed man calmly, which made the silver-clothed man admire him. Normal swordsmen in the sword Qi realm would not be able to do that. He had such a mentality. The silver-clothed man paused and smiled. His tone seemed to be even gentler as he asked, "You really are extraordinary. What's your name, little brother?" "Chu Mu. My name is Zhuge. Brother Chu deserves a lot of credit for killing the people from the Blood Sword Tower today." Zhuge smiled and said, "However, Senior Brother Chu is not a disciple of the Sword Mansion, so he will not be rewarded. But I will not let Brother Chu Mu suffer." Sword Mansion? Chu Mu did not understand. He had only heard of the Sword Faction and the Li Province Sword Academy, but he had never heard of the Sword Mansion. The Sword Mansion is the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. It is the place where all the genius swordsmen of the Great Kuin dynasty gather. It is of an even higher level than the Sword Academy. I see that Brother Chu Mu is still young, but you have such a cultivation. When you have the chance to enter the Sword Mansion, you will be able to truly understand it. Zhuge did not explain too much about the Sword Mansion. He changed the topic. "I need to bring this Blood Sword Tower member's sword and identity medallion back to the Sword Mansion as proof of completing the mission. Furthermore, this sword is not suitable for you, Brother Chu Mu. If you bring it with you, if you encounter a fish from the Blood Sword Tower that escapes the net, it will bring disaster to you. Brother Chu Mu, please check your spatial bracelet and see if there is any identity medallion for this person." Chu Mu nodded. His mind synchronized with the spatial bracelet in his hand, forming a close connection. In an instant, his mind poured into the silver-gray crystal. Everything within the spatial bracelet appeared in his mind. It was a static space about 1 cubic meter in size. There were some things placed in an orderly manner inside. Chu Mu carefully scanned through them. There were spiritual stones, porcelain bottles, books, a palm-sized black medallion, and some black clothes. With a thought, the black medallion appeared in his hand, releasing a weak, evil fluctuation. Yes, this is the person's identity medallion. The silver-clothed man was delighted, but he did not try to snatch it. Chu Mu's hand shook slightly, and he threw the medallion to the silver-clothed man. The silver-clothed man caught it, looked at it, and hurriedly put it into his spatial bracelet. Then he grabbed at the air, and the narrow black sword on the ground fell into his hand. He put it into his spatial bracelet. This sword is a medium-grade sword. It is quite valuable. However, I do not have many spiritual stones, so I will give them all to Brother Chu. I hope that they will be of help to you after you reach the Qi transformation realm." As he spoke, Zhuge took out dozens of spiritual stones and flew them to Chu Mu one by one. Chu Mu's eyes flashed with joy. He did not refuse and put the dozens of spiritual stones into his spatial bracelet. Dozens of low-grade spiritual stones naturally cannot compare to a medium-grade sword. However, I do not have anything else that I can take out. Zhuge Ming seemed embarrassed as he said, "In that case, I, Zhuge Ming, owe Brother Chu a favor. In the future, you can come to the Great Kuin Sword Mansion to find me. As long as it is something that I can do, I will not refuse." Chu Mu nodded. In fact, he was already very satisfied with obtaining the spatial bracelet, everything inside it, and dozens of low-grade spiritual stones. No matter how good the sword was, he couldn't use it now. Even in the future, it might not be suitable for him. Moreover, as Zhuge Ming had said, if he brought it with him, even if it was in the space bracelet, it might bring him unnecessary trouble at any time. It was better to not have such a hot potato if he could. As for the favor that Zhuge Ming mentioned, Chu Mu did not take it to heart. That was a distant matter. That's right. Brother Chu, the spatial bracelet is very precious. Even the leader of a low-grade sword sect may not have it. You have to be careful. Zhuge Ming added, "If there is nothing else, Brother Chu can leave first. I still have to deal with this guy's corpse. Goodbye." Chu Mu saluted with his sword, kept the spatial bracelet, and turned to leave. This person is indeed extraordinary. He looks to be only 17 or 18 years old, but his cultivation is close to the middle stage of stage 10. Most importantly, the purity of his sword chi surpasses that of many other sword chi realm swordsmen. He also grasps a high-level killing move. Although he only used one move, I can feel that his true strength is close to that of half-step chi transformation. The silver-clothed man looked at Chu Mu's departing figure and thought to himself. There was a strange light in his eyes. If he has any ill intentions towards me, although I can kill him, I'm afraid that my injuries will worsen. Fortunately, my feeling is not wrong. Perhaps when we meet again in the future, it will be in the Great Kuin Sword Mansion. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 130. After leaving the silver-clothed man, before he even walked down White Maple Mountain, Chu Mu stopped and carefully inspected the items in the spatial bracelet. There were a total of 156 of these spirit stones. Chu Mu was sincerely happy. He had already experienced the powerful effects of spirit stones, so he knew the benefits of these things. Chu Mu picked out 6 relatively different spirit stones from the 156 spirit stones and looked at them carefully. These 6 spirit stones were mainly gray, but the white spots were obviously much larger than the other low-grade spirit stones. Carefully feeling, he found that the spiritual chi in these 6 spirit stones was more vigorous and purer. Is it a middle-grade spirit stone? Chu Mu's mind flashed, and a burst of ecstasy filled his heart. Middle-grade spirit stones, whether it was the purity or the density of spiritual chi, were above low-grade spirit stones. According to the records, the exchange rate between middle-grade spirit stones and low-grade spirit stones was 1 to 10. If it was really a middle-grade spirit stone, then he really made a big profit. Together with his own 3 low-grade spirit stones, a total of 159 spirit stones were put back into the space bracelet. After thinking for a while, he put one of the fake swords into the space wrist wheel. He also took out the clothes inside and threw them away. Then he put his own clothes into the space wrist wheel. He also put all the things in his arms into the space wrist wheel. In this way, he did not have to carry a burden and suddenly felt more relaxed. In addition to the spirit stones, there were 4 books in the space bracelet. Chu Mu took them out and looked at them. They were a sword chi technique, 2 swordsmanship, and a sword skill. The sword chi technique was called Dark Blood Sword Chi Technique. It was a middle-grade black level sword chi technique. It was much more advanced than the Shangyuan sword chi technique that Chu Mu practiced. The Xian rank was originally a large rank higher than the Huang rank. Chu Mu was extremely moved, and he quickly flipped through it. As he read, his face involuntarily changed, and a cold glint flickered in his eyes. There was even a sliver of killing intent circulating. The dark blood sword chi art was not suitable for sword chi realm swordsmen to cultivate, because it started with Xiantian sword chi. Only those who had reached the chi transformation realm could cultivate it. However, the most important thing was that the process of cultivating the dark blood sword chi technique was extremely cruel and bloody. It required the slaughter of living beings and the blood to assist the cultivation. Moreover, the best effect was still human blood. Once cultivated, the dark blood sword chi was not only fiercer than the Xiantian sword chi cultivated from ordinary mystic level sword chi arts, it was also very sinister and strange. Once hit, the blood flow in one's body would be affected, resulting in adverse changes that would affect one's health and so on. In serious cases, it could even cause one's blood to deteriorate and cause death. No wonder Zhuge Ming said that the black-clothed man had committed all sorts of evil deeds and his hands were stained with blood. Just by looking at the dark blood sword chi technique, I can tell that this person's usual behavior is indeed worthy of death. Chu Mu thought to himself, although he had never bemoaned the state of the universe, nor had he ever acted on behalf of the heavens, he was extremely disgusted by the practice of killing innocent people in the pursuit of power. He had always believed that people who practiced the sword should follow their hearts and constantly strive for self-improvement. They should not pursue power through such cruel and bloody methods. An organization like the Blood Sword Tower really should be eradicated. Stopping himself from destroying the dark blood sword chi technique, Chu Mu stowed it back into his spatial bracelet. Although he would not cultivate it, he could keep it for research purposes. Perhaps in the future, he might come across a swordsman who cultivated the dark blood sword chi technique. As for the other 3 books, one was a high-level sword technique, one was a super-level sword technique, and one was a high-level sword skill. The high-level sword technique was called the dark blood sword technique. The super-level sword technique was called the blood slaughter sword technique, and the high-level sword skill was called the dark blood sword burst. Although Chu Mu was extremely moved, these 2 sword techniques and 1 sword technique all required the dark blood sword aura art as a foundation to be able to be cultivated. Otherwise, if he forcefully cultivated them, it would only cause his sword aura to become chaotic and his meridians to be damaged. What a pity, Chu Mu thought to himself after flipping through them. He tossed the 3 books into his spatial bracelet. Finally, there were 3 bottles in total. They were azure, white, and red. There were labels on the bottles. Meridian Recovery Pill, Chi Recovery Pill, Scarlet Blood Pill. Chu Mu frowned slightly as he thought hard. He had read most of the books in the library of the Azure Edge Sword Sect, and there were records and descriptions of some pills. The pills used by sword chi cultivators were collectively known as pills. For example, Chi Gathering Pill, Chi Training Pill, Chi Breaking Pill, and so on. They were all considered low-level pills. Once one reached the Chi transformation realm, they were collectively known as pills. The grades were also different, with at least mid-level pills. For pills, as long as one was proficient in medicinal theory and had enough spiritual herbs, they could be made. But once it was a high-level pill, it would require an alchemist who had mastered the art of alchemy to be able to refine it. Thus, the value of a pill was far higher than a pill. As he pondered, the descriptions of the 3 pills appeared in Chu Mu's mind. According to their grades, these 3 pills are all mid-level. The main use of the Meridian Recovery Pill is to repair the damage to the meridians. The Qi Recovery Pill is to restore the Xiantian sword qi in the Dantian. As for the Scarlet Blood Pill, it is used to replenish blood. It seems that the scarlet blood fruit is one of the main spiritual herbs used to refine the Scarlet Blood Pill. Chu Mu inspected the 3 bottles of pills one by one. There were still 6 Meridian Recovery Pills, 7 Qi Recovery Pills, and 4 Scarlet Blood Pills. He poured out a meridian recovery pill and put the rest of the pills back into his spatial wristband. He then stuffed the spatial wristband into his clothes. Looking left and right, there was no one else besides him. There were also no traces of humans or fierce beasts in the surroundings. Just to be safe, Chumu found a more remote place and took the meridian recovery pill. It was worthy of being a mid-level pill, one suitable for Chi Transformation Realm swordsmen. As soon as it entered his mouth, it transformed into surging medicinal energy that rushed into his body and into his meridians. If it wasn't for the fact that Chumu's meridians were tougher than ordinary swordsmen's and that the meridian recovery pill's medicinal energy was gentler than ordinary mid-level pills, he probably wouldn't have been able to endure it. His injured meridians were riddled with wounds from being cut by swords. This was caused by the Xiantian sword chi. At this moment, under the medicinal energy of the meridian recovery pill, they were rapidly healing. Chumu looked inside himself and could clearly see that the shocking and scalp-numbing wounds on his meridians were rapidly healing. Waves of cool and refreshing feeling continuously passed through his meridians. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Everyone follow. The footprints show that this is the escape route of that damned little bastard. At the peak of White Maple Mountain, numerous figures flashed. One after another, swordsmen arrived at the peak. There were a total of 15 of them. The leader of the group was a late 10th phase swordsman. There were also 2 mid-10th phase swordsmen and 4 early 10th phase swordsmen. The remaining 8 were all at the peak of 9th phase. That damned little bastard. Not only did he kill 6 of our gang members, he also had 3 fake swords on him. No matter what, our team must first find him and bring him back to our gang to receive punishment. The late 10th phase swordsman in the lead shouted in a stern voice. His eyes were filled with killing intent. That's right. Once we capture him and bring him back to our gang, we'll have made a great contribution and will be rewarded. A mid-10th phase swordsman to the side agreed. One of the peak 9th phase swordsmen squatted down and carefully looked at the ground. His eyes were as sharp as an eagle's, not letting go of even the slightest trace. Suddenly, this peak 9th phase swordsman stood up and quickly flew to the right. When the others saw this, they quickly followed. I see it. That little bastard is just ahead. A low cry, filled with joy, sounded out. The 15 King Snake Gang swordsmen all revealed joyful expressions. Their speed suddenly increased, and they turned into arrows that shot towards Chumu. Chumu had just finished his cultivation. A meridian recovery pill had completely healed his meridians, and he could once again display all of his sword chi cultivation. Not far away, a low cry and the sound of movement techniques breaking through the wind could be heard. This caused Chumu's ears to slightly tremble. He opened his eyes, and a sharp light pierced through the void and directly approached. Whoosh! 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 The 15 swordsmen of the King Snake Gang quickly moved and formed an encirclement around Chumu. Each of them had a cold smile on their faces, and their cold and sharp gazes fell on Chumu's body, harboring malicious intentions. Little brat, obediently allow yourself to be captured. Otherwise, you'll suffer physical pain. The late 10th phase swordsman in the lead sneered. Each of them pulled out their swords, and sword light flashed as they pointed at Chumu. Waves of fierce killing intent locked onto Chumu, just by relying on a bunch of chickens and pottery dogs. Chumu indifferently smiled. His meridians had completely healed, and he no longer had any worries. The moment he finished speaking, his right hand grabbed the sword hilt as fast as lightning and pulled it out. The sword light was like a crescent moon. The moment he pulled out his sword, Chumu leapt into the air and used his killer move. 24 cold killing intents shot forward. You actually dare to attack. The expressions of the King Snake Gang's swordsmen greatly changed. They were abnormally furious as they hurriedly dodged and pulled out their swords. Whoosh! 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 The air shattered as the 24 waves of cold killing intent were incomparably fierce. 2 of the swordsmen were unable to dodge in time and were immediately hit. Fortunately, they were able to use their sword chi in time, so they were not injured. As for the 10th phase swordsmen, they all activated their sword light. Activating sword light was the ability of a 10th phase swordsman. Early 10th phase swordsmen could activate half an inch of sword light. Mid-10th phase swordsmen could activate 1 inch of sword light. Late 10th phase swordsmen could activate 2 inches of sword light, and peak 10th phase swordsmen could activate 3 inches of sword light. Of course, there were some exceptions. For example, Xiao Qianfeng could activate half an inch of sword light when he was at the 9th phase. When he reached the early 10th phase, he could activate 1 inch of sword light. The power of sword light was extremely terrifying, far surpassing sword chi. The sword chi armor was simply unable to block it. However, compared to Chumu, the difference between these swordsmen and him was simply too great. Chumu used his wind walk movement technique. He was practically gliding along the swords as he swung the fake, clear wind sword again and again, causing streams of blood to spray into the air. Kill him! The 10th phase late stage sword practitioner's heart was greatly shaken, and he was filled with shock. He quickly let out a fierce roar and used his killing move without mercy. This was because there were already 3 9th phase peak sword practitioners who had died under Chumu's sword. Their throats had been cut open. The other 10th phase swordsmen also used their killing moves. However, Chumu's body was blown into the distance like the wind. Their killing moves all missed. Sword chi shot out in all directions, bombarding the surrounding trees and stones, breaking them into pieces and turning them into ruins. 30% of the wind concept had been combined, and the intermediate sword technique killing move, Clear Wind Kill, was used. A 1-meter-long light blue blade sliced through the air, tearing apart everything in its path. This caused the swordsmen of the King Snake Gang to have a drastic change in expression. Their pupils dilated as they felt a light blue color fill their eyes. Poochie, poochie, poochie sounds were endless. Under the terrifying Clear Wind Kill, 3 swordsmen were hit. Their sword chi armors were shattered on the spot, and their entire bodies were blown away. A huge wound opened up on their abdomens and chests, causing blood to spurt out. It was a ghastly sight. Chu Mu's foot tapped on a tree trunk. His 2 legs slightly shook, and he became an arrow that left the bowstring. With incomparably fast speed, he flew over. A sword swept through the air, once again bringing forth a few drops of blood. Landing on the ground, he turned around and spun. Sword light flashed as his body passed by the last 3 10th phase swordsmen. He shook off the blood on his sword and put it back into its scabbard. Those 3 10th phase swordsmen let out a strange sound. A trace of blood quickly spread out from their necks. Their eyes were wide open, filled with disbelief. Their entire bodies slowly fell forward. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 131. Our gang will not let you go. A swordsman at the peak of the 10th phase let out a final cry. His body fell backwards as blood flowed and he died. On the ground beside him, there were over 20 corpses lying in a disorderly manner. They were all in different positions, but they all had one thing in common, and that was the thin wounds on their necks. Fresh blood continuously seeped out and dyed the ground red. Chu Mu always liked to kill people at the neck. Compared to other parts of the body, the neck was more likely to be fatal. With a sword strike and sword chi, death was inevitable. These 20 corpses were the 4th group of pursuers from the King Snake Gang that Chu Mu had killed. This made Chu Mu, who had always been very patient, feel very impatient. They were just a bunch of chickens and pottery dogs, but they kept chasing after him and died under his sword, one after another. After finding some elixirs and other things on their bodies, Chumu put them all into his spatial bracelet. He immediately used his movement technique and quickly went down White Maple Mountain without looking back. He was already tired of it, so he had to leave this place as soon as possible to avoid being found by the King Snake Gang. If that happened, it would be another massacre. Most importantly, if he encountered the Chi Transformation Realm swordsman of the King Snake Gang, he would most likely be in danger. The deaths of the 4 groups of pursuers caused a great loss to the King Snake Gang. Among the 4 groups of pursuers, there were nearly 30 swordsmen at the 10th phase and 60 or 70 swordsmen at the 9th phase. They were all the main force and middle members of the gang. It had been many years since the King Snake Gang had suffered such a loss. With these people dead, the overall strength of the King Snake Gang was clearly weakened. The various factions in White Maple City were ready to make a move. After all, no one was willing to submit to others. In the past, the King Snake Gang was strong, so they did not dare to have any ideas. Even if they did, they could only suppress them. However, now that the King Snake Gang had lost more than half of its middle and main forces, the leaders of the other factions in White Maple City secretly met and discussed. Chumu did not know that because of him, a variable had appeared in White Maple City. And now, the King Snake Gang, which had suffered heavy losses, was about to fall into a crisis and no longer had the strength to pursue him. Of course, Chumu was also deeply hated by the King Snake Gang. Once they had the chance, they would definitely find Chumu and torture him to death. However, they didn't know Chumu's name or his background. Basically, everyone in the King Snake Gang who had seen Chumu was already dead. Even if they wanted to find him, it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. With the spatial bracelet, it was much more convenient to travel continuously. Finally, after a month, Chumu entered the Li province. His cultivation had also broken through to the middle 10th stage. As soon as he entered the Li province, Chumu carefully recalled the topographic map he had seen in the Sword Sect. After asking 2 passers-by, he rushed in the direction of the Sword Academy. In the Li province, there was the largest city, Dali City. However, the Li Province Sword Academy was not located in Dali City. Instead, it was located at the foot of a mountain range about 100 miles away from Dali City. This mountain range was called the Dali Mountain Range. It stretched for tens of thousands of miles and was the largest mountain range in the Li Province. The highest point of the Dali Mountain Range was more than 6,000 meters. From afar, the entire mountain range was like an ancient giant beast that was crawling and sleeping. It emitted a heavy pressure that made one's heart heavy, and the highest mountain peak was like a sharp sword that pierced the sky, piercing through the clouds. After confirming the correct location of the Li Province Sword Academy, Chumu's speed was very fast. He wanted to know if his eldest senior brother Li Yi and the others had already arrived at the Li Province Sword Academy, and if Xiao Qianfeng, who had fallen off the cliff, was still alive and had arrived at the Li Province Sword Academy. Like a gust of wind, Chumu did not stir up any dust. This showed that Chumu had amazing control over his own body. After a while, a vast and magnificent Sword Academy appeared before his eyes. As he got closer, Chumu discovered that outside the Sword Academy, about 3,000 meters away, there was a gurgling river. Tender green grass grew on both sides of the river. Not far away, there were some small pink and yellow wildflowers that looked like wild chrysanthemums blooming. When the wind blew, the tender green grass swayed slightly. As the small wildflowers swayed, a delicate fragrance blended into the wind and gradually drifted away. The river was about 5 meters long, and there was a small wooden bridge on both sides. From afar, it looked rather poetic. Crossing the river in a flash, Chumu officially entered the territory of the Li Province Sword Academy. The road ahead was flat, and there was a small path paved with gravel that led directly to the gates of the Sword Academy. Along the gravel path, Chumu's speed was very fast, and the Sword Academy appeared more clearly in his eyes. The Sword Academy did not look small. It was estimated to be 2 to 3 times the size of Qinglan town. There were 5-meter-high, gray-white walls, and there were dark blue, glazed tiles on the walls that reflected dazzling light. Behind the walls, there were some trees and bamboos that were taller than the walls. There were also some vines that climbed over the walls. There were green leaves and small blue flowers blooming on the vines, forming a beautiful scene. But Chumu only glanced around, and his gaze was attracted by a stone tablet outside the Sword Academy. The stone tablet was about 3 meters tall and was silver gray in color. There were 4 bright red words on it: Li Province, Sword Academy. These 4 words were like silver hooks and iron strokes that revealed a sharp aura everywhere. It was so sharp that one could not look at it for too long. Otherwise, one would feel a stinging pain in one's eyes. After Chu Mu took a few glances, he had to shift his gaze to the 2 swordsmen at the gate. These 2 swordsmen stood one on the left and one on the right. Their backs were as straight as swords, and their auras were extremely condensed from head to toe. A sharp aura circled around them. Their eyebrows were cold and stern, and their faces were expressionless. When their eyes opened and closed, strands of light flickered, and they all fell on Chu Mu, who was flying over. Immediately, Chu Mu felt 2 sharp auras coming straight at him. They were like swords that made him slightly apprehensive. These 2 swordsmen wore white, short swordsman robes. They didn't seem to be very old, around 20 or 30 years old. However, Chu Mu couldn't see through their cultivation. The feeling he got was that they were much stronger than Wei Hong, but they didn't seem to have reached the Qi transformation realm. Half-step Qi transformation. A voice sounded in Chu Mu's mind. He was inwardly surprised. This Li Province Sword Academy actually had 2 half-step Qi transformation swordsmen guarding the gate. It was truly shocking. Stop. This is the Li Province Sword Academy. Unauthorized personnel are not allowed to enter. One of the swordsmen stared at Chu Mu and said indifferently, "I'm here to study in the Sword Academy," Chu Mu said softly. "Show me your sword badge." The other swordsman's voice was just as indifferent. Chu Mu's left hand reached into his robes, and his spiritual consciousness spread into the space bracelet. He took out the Qingfeng sword sex badge and placed it in his left hand. He then fished it out of his robes. The space bracelet was extremely valuable and precious. Even Luo Tianxiong did not have one. Thus, with his current cultivation, Chu Mu did not dare to openly wear the space bracelet on his hand. After handing over the badge and inspecting it, he looked at Chu Mu a few times before returning the badge. "You may enter." Chu Mu took the badge and strode into the Sword Academy. The first thing he saw was a cobblestone path that led straight ahead. On the left and right were green bamboo forests that emitted bursts of fragrance. Furthermore, Chu Mu keenly discovered that the spirit qi here was much denser than in the Qingfeng sword sect. As he walked forward, Chu Mu saw groups of 2s and 3s before long. They were all swordsmen around the age of 17 or 20. Their cultivation was at least at the early 10th stage. These people also saw Chu Mu, but they only glanced at him and did not pay much attention to him. This was because Chu Mu was only at the middle 10th stage. There were many people at this level in the Sword Academy, so they did not take him seriously. Chu Mu strode over and carefully sensed the aura fluctuations emitted by these swordsmen. As expected, they were all extraordinary. They were not something that the loose swordsman could compare to. I wonder where the Qingfeng sword sect's courtyard is located. Chu Mu looked around and remembered that Luo Yufeng had once said that different sword sects in the Liz Ho Sword Academy had different courtyards. It seems that I should ask someone. Suddenly, a swordsman walked over and excitedly said to another swordsman, "Let's go. I heard there's a good show over there." "What show?" the other swordsman asked. He was the person Chu Mu wanted to ask. A new disciple of the Qingfeng sword sect is being bullied. How pitiful. He only has one arm, he said as he walked. A new disciple of the Qingfeng sword sect. One arm. A light flashed in his eyes. He looked at the two swordsmen and immediately followed. Kneel down and apologize to me immediately. Otherwise, you can go to the sword battle arena. A cold and arrogant voice sounded. You were the one who bumped into me first. You should be the one apologizing. This voice was clearly very stubborn. When it entered Chu Mu's ears, it made him feel even more familiar. His pupils slightly constricted, and through the surrounding crowd, he faintly saw a familiar figure among them. After squeezing into the crowd, he looked around. One of them had an arrogant expression. He stood straight and had a cold smile on his face. There was a cold light in his eyes. He looked down at the person in front of him as if he was looking at a prey. Chu Mu felt that he looked familiar, but he could not remember where he had seen him before. The other person only had one arm. He held a sword and was kneeling on the ground with one knee. His head was slightly raised. He stared at the other person with a fierce gaze. He gritted his teeth and looked angry and unyielding. What a joke. You were the one who didn't look where you were going. You just had to bump into me. I'm definitely injured. You have to kneel down and apologize. Also, you have to compensate me with 3 chi-increasing pills. Otherwise, I won't let this go. The person touched his chest and shouted in a threatening tone. Is that so? I'd like to see how you won't let this go. Chu Mu took a step forward and looked directly at the person. His tone was indifferent, but there was a trace of coldness in his eyes. Brother Chu. Xie Chunlei was stunned at first. Then he shouted with a face full of surprise. He wanted to stand up, but it was as if he had touched a wound. He took a deep breath and his cheeks twitched, but he still endured the pain and stood up. He looked at Chu Mu with a face full of excitement. Senior Xie, you're fine, right? Chu Mu turned around to look at Xie Chunlei and smiled as he softly spoke. I'm fine. It's just that this bastard attacked me and accused me of bumping into him. Xie Chunlei said and stared at the person with a face full of anger. He seemed to have thought of something and added, By the way, he is a disciple of Qinglan's sword sect. A disciple of Qinglan's sword sect? Chu Mu was slightly stunned. When he looked at the person again, he suddenly thought of Wei Hong. This person's eyebrows were similar to Wei Hong's. It seemed that there was a special relationship between him and Wei Hong. I see. No wonder you are so arrogant. Do you think that you can make me back down and forgive you just because you are in the middle of the 10th level? Let me tell you, that is absolutely impossible. Even if your Azure Edge Sword sect master came here, reason would stand on my side. This person's voice was stern as he roared. When he swept his gaze over Chu Mu, his eyes flashed with traces of disdain. There's no need for the leader of our sect to come here. You want to fight in the arena, right? Sure, set a time, and we will fight to the death in the arena. Chu Mu took a step forward. His aura was extremely sharp, and it was as if it was tearing the void. There was a terrible light in his eyes that forced the person to look at him directly. However, Chu Mu's words were as sharp as a sword, causing everyone's hearts to tremble. You! The Qinglan disciple subconsciously shrank his neck. Chu Mu's sharp edge was too strong, and it made his heart involuntarily cold. He clearly heard Chu Mu's words. It was a fight to the death, not a fight to the death. The first thing he said was a fight to the death. This was simply the behavior of a madman. Either you fight to the death, or you get lost. It is your choice. Chu Mu's voice was as sharp as a sword, and it made the other person's heart tremble. He unconsciously took a step back and suddenly pointed at Chu Mu with a red face. You. Just wait and see. After that, the Qinglan disciple turned and strode away. His heart was full of hatred for Chu Mu, and he swore that he would teach Chu Mu a lesson. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 132. This Qingfeng sword sect seems to have produced a great disciple. Oh, he's a very courageous person. Humph, what's so great about him? At best, he's just a lunatic who doesn't know anything. The moment he opens his mouth, he's going to fight to the death. Doesn't he know that in the Sword Academy, a sword chi of the 10th stage is nothing? After Chu Mu and Xie Chunlei left, all kinds of discussions were heard. Some were full of praise, and some were full of disdain. Brother Chu, where's Brother Xiao? Isn't he with you? Why didn't you arrive together? Xie Chunlei's tone was a little excited as he asked several questions in a row. There were some accidents on the way, so I arrived first. Chu Mu smiled slightly and recalled the interception of the Qinglan sword sect's Qi transformation realm swordsman. A fierce, murderous intent flashed in his heart. It was a fierce, murderous intent towards the Qinglan sword sect. Oh, we arrived here 5 days ago. Now, they should be in the Qingfeng courtyard. Once Senior Chu arrives, they will definitely be very happy. Xie Chunlei nodded and smiled happily. He did not notice the fierce, murderous intent that flashed in Chu Mu's eyes. How did you get into a conflict with the disciples of the Qinglan sword sect? Chu Mu changed the topic and asked, the disciples of the Qinglan sword sect. At this point, Xie Chunlei gritted his teeth and looked angry. Since we came to the Sword Academy a few days ago, the disciples of the Qinglan sword sect appeared outside the Qingfeng courtyard from time to time. This time, I went out for a walk, intending to familiarize myself with the Sword Academy. Unexpectedly, the disciple of the Qinglan sword sect, Wei Gang, suddenly rushed up from behind and hit me hard in the ribs, causing me to fall down. Instead, he said that I bumped into him and wanted me to kneel down and apologize. He also wanted me to compensate for the chi-boosting pills. He was clearly trying to make trouble for me. If Senior Brother Chu hadn't arrived in time, I'm afraid that this time I would have really been in trouble. Yes. Chu Mu nodded slightly. He began to think. It seemed that only he and Xiao Qianfeng were attacked by the swordsman in the Qi transformation realm. Did this mean that the Qinglan sword sect felt that the two of them would be the real threat when they grew up? As for Li Yi and the others, it was highly likely that the Green Orchid sword sect did not take them seriously. However, as soon as Li Yi and the others arrived at the Liz Ho Sword Academy, the disciples of the Qinglan sword sect took action. This situation made Chu Mu suspect that the Qinglan sword sect had already sent a message to the Sword Academy. Whether my guess is true or not, in short, the Qinglan sword sect and I are completely at odds with each other. In the future, when I am strong enough, I will kill the Qinglan sword sect and make them regret it. Chu Mu secretly said, as if it was an oath from the soul, Senior Brother Chu, we're here. Our Qingfeng Academy is in front. Xie Chunlei's surprised voice woke Chu Mu up. Looking forward, there was a courtyard. The courtyard door was written with 3 big words, Qingfeng Academy. The door of the Qingfeng Academy suddenly opened and a figure walked out. Senior Brother Wang. Xie Chunlei hurriedly shouted. The figure looked over, and immediately his eyes fell on Chu Mu's face. A touch of surprise spread from the depths of his eyes, overflowing his whole face. He whispered, Junior Brother Chu, you're finally here. Senior Brother Wang. Chu Mu smiled and saluted Wang Tingo with a sword. Come in quickly. If Senior Brother Luo and the others see you, they will be very happy. Wang Tingo laughed and quickly opened the door completely to let Chu Mu and Xie Chunlei in. Ha 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 ha. Senior brothers, come out quickly. As soon as they entered the Qingfeng Academy, Wang Tingo's voice spread like thunder. As for Chu Mu, he swept his eyes over and looked around. This Qingfeng courtyard was truly like another courtyard. There was a front courtyard, a large hall, and many other buildings. Soon after, Chu Mu's expression was slightly startled because he once again keenly felt that the spirit aura inside Qingfeng courtyard seemed to be even denser than outside of Qingfeng courtyard. Junior brother, what are you so happy about? A voice came from one of the buildings. Come out quickly and see who's here. Wang Tingo shouted again. Could it be Junior brother Chu? After a moment of silence, another voice sounded with a hint of surprise. Immediately after, the sound of wind breaking could be heard. One after another, silhouettes rapidly flew out from the various buildings and finally landed in the front yard. Junior brother Chu, it's really you. You're finally here. This is great. Li Yi and Yuan, Wenhua's faces were filled with surprise and joy. They were sincerely happy. Junior brother Chu, you're finally here. Luo Yufeng also had a face full of smiles. Zhou Jin stood at the side and laughed. In addition, there was another person that Chu Mu had never seen before. He had a cold expression on his face and stared at Chu Mu. There was a trace of curiosity in his eyes. Junior brother Chu, your cultivation has reached the middle stage of 10th stage? Immediately, Luo Yufeng's face flashed a trace of astonishment. He was very clear that Chu Mu's cultivation had only broken through to the early stage of 10th stage a few months ago, a little later than Li Yi and the others. But now Li Yi and the others were still in the early stage of 10th stage, a considerable distance away from the middle stage. However, Chu Mu had already broken through to the middle stage. This speed was a little too fast. Yes, I just broke through. Chu Mu nodded. With the Qinglan holy fruit increasing his cultivation talent to the 7th rank, coupled with the low-rank spirit stones and the yellow-rank top-quality upper origin sword chi technique, such a speed was nothing compared to the combination of all these factors. I'm ashamed, as a senior brother, I'm now in the middle stage of 10th stage. Junior brother, you've only broken through to the early stage of 10th stage for 3 months. How could you break through to the middle stage? Zhou Jin sighed a little lonely, but it was immediately replaced by joy. His tone also became cheerful, but this is also a blessing for our sect. The person with the cold face did not say a word. He kept staring at Chu Mu, as if he wanted to see through Chu Mu. Junior brother, let me introduce you. This is 3rd senior brother Zheng Xiuran, a late-stage 10th stage sword chi cultivator. Li Yi pointed to the person with the cold face and introduced. 3rd senior brother. Chu Mu saluted with his sword. Junior brother Chu. Zhang Xiuran also saluted with his sword. His expression was still cold, his tone was cold, and his eyes were cold. But a trace of curiosity flashed again. Junior brother Chu, I heard that you defeated 2nd senior brother. I want to compete with you. Chu Mu was stunned. This 3rd senior brother seemed to be too direct, and the others showed a trace of a bitter smile. 3rd junior brother, if you want to challenge junior brother Chu, you need to choose a time. Junior brother Chu has just arrived. He shook his head slightly and smiled. Junior brother Chu has just arrived and is not familiar with the Sword Academy. Let's explain to him first, then welcome him. After that, if you want to compete, then compete. Okay. Zhang Xiuran nodded. The group of people walked into the hall and sat down. Junior brother Chu, let me first tell you about the situation of our Qingfeng Academy, and then tell you about the Sword Academy. Luo Yufeng sat in the main seat and said with a smile, Currently all the members of Qingfeng Academy are the 8 of us. Oh right, there is also junior brother Xiao Qianfeng. Including him, there are a total of 9 people. But didn't junior brother Xiao Qianfeng and junior brother Chu travel together? Why haven't they arrived yet? They all looked at Chu Mu, waiting for Chu Mu's answer. When we left Qinglan Mountain, we were intercepted by a Qi transformation realm swordsman and separated. Chu Mu said but did not say the details. What? A Qi transformation realm swordsman intercepted and killed. Luo Yufeng and the others were shocked, and their expressions changed greatly. They were so shocked that they couldn't sit still and stood up, their Qi surging chaotically. It's okay. It was probably just a Qi transformation realm swordsman. So the 2 of us split up and escaped. With Xiao Qianfeng's ability, he shouldn't have been able to catch up, Chu Mu said. He didn't want to tell the truth and increase the variables. I see. I hope junior brother Xiao is safe and sound. Luo Yufeng sat down again with a serious expression. He exhaled and then looked at Chu Mu. Junior brother Chu, you are also extraordinary to be able to escape from a Qi transformation realm swordsman. Senior brother, why are there only a few of us in Qingfeng Academy? Chu Mu smiled and changed the topic. Every sword sect is only allowed to study in Liz Ho Sword Academy for 3 years. If you can't enter the top 100 within 3 years, you have to leave the academy and return to your own sword sect. Luo Yufeng was still deeply shocked, and his words seemed to be unintentional. In the past, the seniors of our Qingfeng sword sect studied in the academy for 3 years and didn't have the chance to enter the top 100, so they all returned to their sword sects and became deacons and so on. In addition, there are very few disciples in our sect who have broken through to the 10th stage, so now there are only a few of us. In addition, there are 2 stewards who are responsible for washing our clothes and cooking for us. I will introduce them to you later. However, if any of us are able to enter the top 100, our sect will be rewarded by the great Kuan royal family and obtain various medicinal pills, elixirs, etc. This will be of great help to our sect in nurturing new disciples. At that time, the number of disciples in Qingfeng Courtyard will slowly increase. Luo Yufeng explained, At present, among the 8 of us, I am the eldest senior brother, Zhou Jin is the 2nd senior brother, Xiu Ran is the 3rd senior brother, Li Yi is the 4th senior brother, Minghua is the 5th senior brother, and Ting Hao is the 6th senior brother. As for the 7th position, junior brother Xia has always believed that junior brother Chu is qualified to take it. I entered the academy the latest, so I will be 8th, Chu Mu said. Senior brother Chu, this. Xia Chunlei was anxious. Junior brother Xia, don't worry. Since junior brother Chu has said so, then you will be the 7th junior brother. This is just an order between us, and it is easier to address each other. It doesn't mean anything, Luo Yufeng said. Xia Chunlei sat down. The spirit qi in the Li Province Sword Academy is twice as dense as the outside world, and the spirit qi in our Qingfeng Academy is twice as dense as the Sword Academy. Luo Yufeng continued. Cultivating in such an environment will naturally progress faster than in the outside world. In the entire Sword Academy, there are a total of 48 courtyards, which correspond to the 47 sword sects in Liz Ho. Among them, there are 3 high-grade sword sects, the Raging Wave Sword Sect, the Profound Sword Sect, and the Plain Heart Sword Sect. There are also 8 middle-grade sword sects and 36 low-grade sword sections. It is said that the spirit qi in the courtyards of the 3 high-grade sword sects is 3 times as rich as in other places of the Sword Academy, while the spirit qi in the courtyards of the 8 middle-grade sword sects is twice as rich, and the spirit qi in the courtyards of the 36 low-grade sword sects is twice as rich. In addition, there is a courtyard that belongs to the prefecture magistrate, and it is on par with the 3 high-grade sword sections. The so-called prefecture magistrate was the highest official of a state appointed by the royal family. The prefecture magistrate's descendants were the prefecture magistrate's son or daughter, as well as some direct descendants of the younger generation. Currently, there are 4 great experts in the Sword Academy, known as the 4 heroes of the Sword Academy. They are Chu He from the Raging Wave Sword Sect, Su Jianfeng from the Profound Sword Sect, Li Huayu from the Plain Heart Sword Sect, and the prefecture magistrate's son, Zhou Hongyu. They are around 20 years old, and all of them are at the beginning of the Qi transformation realm. Luo Yufeng said again. Everyone else had heard of it except for Chu Mu, who had just arrived. This Raging Wave Sword Sect, Chu, he has the same surname as junior brother Chu. Chu He. Chu Mu's eyes flashed, but his heart was in turmoil. The son of the Chu family's patriarch was also called Chu He, and he was around 20 years old. He had also joined a high-grade sword sect, although he did not know what sect it was. But now, it seemed that this raging wave sword sect's Chu, he was the Chu family's Chu He. Next, Luo Yufeng introduced Chu Mu to the various related matters of the Sword Academy and other things that he needed to know. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 133. When Chu Mu arrived at the Qingfeng courtyard, Wei Gang, the disciple of the Qinglan sword sect, also returned to the Qingfeng courtyard. Like the Qingfeng courtyard, the Qinglan courtyard was one of the 36 lower-grade sword sects in the Lizhou province. However, it was quite a distance away from the Qingfeng courtyard. I'm so pissed off. This disciple of the Qingfeng sword sect is so arrogant. As soon as Wei Gang returned to the Qinglan courtyard, he directly rushed into the hall and sat down. He slammed his palm on the thick and hard iron wooden table and shouted with a face full of anger. Coincidentally, in the hall, there were two other people leisurely drinking tea. When they saw Wei Gang's angry look, they suddenly looked at each other and were a little surprised. They put down the teapot in their hands and looked at each other. Fourth brother, who in the Qingfeng sword sect is so blind to offend you? Why are you so angry? One of them stood up and asked with a smile. That's right, fourth senior brother. The Qingfeng sword sect is a weak sword sect. What kind of person could make you so angry? Although the other did not stand up, he also said with a smile. When he mentioned the Qingfeng sword sect, there was a flash of disdain in his tone. One had to know that the Qinglan sword sect had a record of one of their seniors making it into the top 100 of the Sword Academy. The entire sword sect was praised by the royal family, but the Qingfeng sword sect had never received such an honor. Listen, you guys, don't you think it's infuriating? Wei Gang's anger calmed down a little and began to talk about it in detail. When he talked about the appearance of Chu Mu, his anger surged again, and he slammed the table hard again. This abominable thing, he's only in the middle of the 10th level, and he dares to be so arrogant. If I didn't want to be a busybody, I wouldn't be afraid of him. If he wants to fight to the death in the arena, then let's fight to the death in the arena. Who's afraid of who? The other two looked at each other. They had some understanding of Wei Gang. They knew that he was a person who only knew how to talk big. When it came to real battles, he was timid. He could get the title of fourth brother in Qinglan Academy only because of his big brother Wei Hong. Wei Hong's cultivation was at the peak of 10th stage. His swordsmanship was not weak. Coupled with his belligerence, he was somewhat famous in the entire Sword Academy. In the entire Qinglan Academy, he was the current eldest brother. Wei Gang's cultivation was only at the middle stage of 10th stage. If he did not have Wei Hong as his backer, he would not be much of a threat. Fourth senior brother, what is the name of this disciple of the Azure Edge sword sect who dared to challenge you? One of them asked. How would I know his name? Wei Gang was still angry. In short, he is definitely not one of the people who entered the Sword Academy a few days ago. Listening to his conversation with the cripple, it seems that he has just arrived at the Sword Academy. As he spoke, the anger in Wei Gang's heart gradually calmed down. He carefully recalled and revealed a look of realization. Oh yes, at that time, the cripple called him senior brother Chu, but he did not say what his name was. Surnamed Chu. The two looked at each other as if they had thought of something. One of them smiled and saluted Wei Gang. Fourth senior brother, this surnamed Chu may really be a newcomer. He doesn't understand how deep the waters of the Sword Academy are. He thinks that with his cultivation he can be domineering. This kind of person will definitely not be arrogant for long. Senior brother, you don't need to ruin your mood because of this kind of person. That's right. This kind of person will definitely not be arrogant for long. Soon he will understand that such strength is nothing. The other person echoed and saluted as well. Fourth senior brother, we are going to cultivate. We will take our leave first. Go, go. When Wei Gang heard them say this, he thought about it and felt much better. He waved his hand and said arrogantly. After the two left, they did not really go to cultivate. Instead, they quickly walked to a pavilion. There was a banging sound on the door. "Who is it?" A cold and harsh voice came from inside the room. "Second senior brother, it's us, Yen Ming and Wang Kuei. Come in." The voice was much gentler. The two immediately opened the door and walked in. "Why aren't you two cultivating? Why are you looking for me?" Song Guangtao walked down from the second floor with his hands behind his back. His body was straight, and he walked with a majestic gait. He asked with an indifferent expression, "Second senior brother, it's like this." Yan Ming hurriedly explained what had happened to Wei Gang. "I remember that second senior brother mentioned before that in the contents of the message from the elders of our sect, there were two disciples of the Azure Edge Sword sect named Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng. I think this surnamed Chu guy who just appeared, could he be that Chu Mu?" "Chu Mu." Song Guangtao flicked his sleeves and sat down, looking thoughtful. Not long ago, Song Guangtao received a letter from the Qinglan Sword sect. It mentioned that most of the elite disciples of the Qinglan Sword sect were killed in the void realm of Qinglan. Even Wei Hong died in it. Such content shocked Song Guangtao. The message also mentioned the disciples of the Azure Edge Sword sect who had arrived at the Sword Academy. It also instructed them to do their best to create all kinds of trouble for the disciples of the Azure Edge Sword sect. Under the circumstances of not violating the rules of the Sword Academy, they should try their best to make the disciples of the Azure Edge Sword sect unable to stay in the Sword Academy. If they could legitimately kill them, it would be even better. Wei Gang is really a good-for-nothing. Song Guangtao frowned and said in a very dissatisfied tone, "In the future, remove Wei Gang's title of fourth senior brother. With his strength, he is not qualified to hold such a title at all." Yan Ming and Wang Kuei were both excited. One had to know that both of them had the sword qi cultivation of the late 10th stage. Although they had just been promoted, they were definitely stronger than that good-for-nothing Wei Gang. But second senior brother, if eldest senior brother comes back, Wei Hong can't come back. In the future, I will be the eldest senior brother of the Azure Edge School. My words are the iron law. Song Guangtao snorted and said, "In the future, Yan Ming, you will be the third senior brother, and Wang Kuei, you will be the fourth senior brother. Later, I will gather all the junior brothers in the Azure Edge School to gather in the hall and announce this matter." "Thank you, eldest senior brother." Yan Ming and Wang Kuei were suddenly overjoyed. They quickly stood up and respectfully bowed to Song Guangtao. "Congratulations to eldest senior brother for your great improvement in cultivation and for sweeping through the Sword Academy." Although the ranking of the senior brothers did not have any substantial benefits, it was better to be called a senior brother by others than to be called a senior brother by someone whose cultivation was not as good as his own. "That's right. My cultivation has improved again. Even if Wei Hong comes back, he may not be my opponent." Song Guangtao's face flashed with a sneer, and his eyes flashed. "You too, go to the Azure Edge School immediately to find out. If the newcomer is really Chu Mu, send him a letter of challenge. 3 days later, we will determine the winner in the sword battle arena of the Sword Academy. I will teach this Chu Mu a lesson. Eldest senior brother, there is no need to use a sledgehammer to kill a chicken. Either one of us can teach this Chu Mu a lesson. The Liz Ho Sword Academy is not the Azure Edge Sword sect." Yan Ming immediately sneered and patted his chest. He looked like he was making a solemn vow. He is only at the middle of the 10th stage. He really thinks he is a big shot. When the time comes, I will teach him a lesson and let him know that the Sword Academy is very deep. He should obediently tuck his tail between his legs. No, I will do it myself. If he is really a genius, I will strangle him." Song Guangtao suddenly stood up. His eyes flashed with a shocking cold light and a trace of strange excitement. Yan Ming and Wang Kuei looked at each other and remembered that this eldest senior brother's hobby was to strangle so-called geniuses. When they were still in the Azure Edge sword sect, he had done similar things many times. Even some of the so-called geniuses of the Azure Edge sword sect and the Azure Water sword sect had suffered. Yes, eldest senior brother, we will definitely do this properly, Wang Kuei said excitedly and turned to leave with Yenming. Wait, no matter if this Chumu accepts or refuses, you have to spread the news that in 3 days, Chumu will compete with me in the sword battle arena. Song Guangtao said with his hands behind his back and an aloof look. As expected of eldest senior brother, you are so considerate. In this way, if this Chumu goes to the sword battle arena, he will definitely be taught a lesson by eldest senior brother. From then on, he will tuck his tail between his legs. If he does not go to the sword battle arena, his reputation will be tarnished and he will not be able to stay in the sword academy. He will have to obediently scram. Yan Ming clapped his hands and flattered him before quickly leaving with Wang Kuei. The gate of the Azure Edge Academy opened and 2 figures walked out and strode away. It was Yuan Wenhua and Chu Mu. This was Yuan Wenhua taking Chu Mu to the Internal Affairs Hall of the Sword Academy to register. After registration, he could also receive corresponding benefits, such as a fake sword and a qi-increasing pill. When Chu Mu learned of such benefits from Luo Yufeng, he was quite surprised. The value of a fake sword was not low. Thinking about it, the 3 major sword sects like the Azure Edge sword sect valued any fake sword very much. Even the swords used by many swordsmen in the Qi transformation realm were only fake swords. Thinking about the biggest force in White Maple City, the King Snake Gang, which was a powerful force that even the Chu clan could not compare to. They also mobilized a lot of people for a fake sword, resulting in many people dying under Chu Mu's sword. He did not expect to be able to receive a fake sword as soon as he entered the Sword Academy. Such benefits showed the generosity of the Sword Academy. Although Chu Mu already had 3 fake swords, he would not refuse to have one more. The value of this thing was not low. Even if he did not need it, he could give it to the Chu clan when he returned in the future. It could be considered as contributing to the prosperity of the Chu clan. As for the qi-increasing pill, it was a low-grade pill suitable for a 10th phase swordsman. The Azure Edge sword sect did not have it, and even the Qinglan sword sect probably did not have it. However, the value of the qi-increasing pill should be very high. Therefore, only swordsmen who had just entered the Sword Academy were able to receive one. After that, they could receive another one every year until the 3rd year was up. Of course, if one could enter the top 100 every year in advance, it would be completely different. The qi-increasing pill was a pill used to increase the cultivation of sword qi. Although Chu Mu now had a lot of spirit stones and could absorb the pure spirit qi in them to cultivate, the speed of cultivation was obviously much faster than under normal circumstances. However, with the qi-increasing pill, it could also shorten the cultivation time by a lot. The Internal Affairs Hall was under the control of an elder of the Sword Academy. This elder was serious and did things impartially. After Chu Mu handed in the Sword Academy's sword badge for verification, he took out 3 things and handed them to Chu Mu. The first was a fake sword with traces of light blue on it. It was a fake sword that leaned towards the water element. In addition, there was a small porcelain bottle with a qi-increasing pill in it. Finally, there was a sword token the size of a palm, which recorded the owner's identity and origin and so on. Junior brother, I heard that the qi-increasing pill's effect is not bad, but I haven't taken it yet. I plan to cultivate until I'm close to the middle stage, then take the pill and break through to the middle stage in one fell swoop. Yuan Wenhua smiled as he walked back to the Azure Edge courtyard with Chu Mu. Chu Mu nodded. He was also thinking that he would not take the qi-increasing pill for the time being. He would first absorb the pure spirit qi in the low-grade spirit stones to cultivate. As soon as his sword qi reached the middle stage, he would take the pill and break through in one fell swoop. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 134. Stop! When Chu Mu and Yu Wenminghua were about to enter the gate of Qingfeng Courtyard, a cold shout came from behind. They looked back and saw two swordsmen striding toward them aggressively. You two are disciples of Qingfeng Courtyard, right? Yanming asked with a sneer. It's none of your business. Yu Wenminghua raised his eyebrows and replied coldly. Of course it's our business. Is there a disciple named Chu Mu in your Qingfeng Courtyard? Wang Kuei took a step forward with a ferocious look on his face. His tone was cold. Among the disciples of Qingfeng Courtyard, he knew that the most powerful one was Luo Yufeng, who was at the peak of 10th phase. However, he was much weaker than Song Guangtao. In addition, the second most powerful one was Zheng Xiuran, who was at the late 10th stage. His overall strength was much inferior to the disciples of Qinglan Courtyard, so he did not put him in his eyes. So what if there is? Yu Wenminghua glanced at Chu Mu and raised his eyebrows again. His eyes flashed with a touch of impatience. When he was about to speak, he heard Chu Mu said indifferently, Of course it's good. Listen, I, the eldest brother of Qinglan Courtyard, have issued a letter of challenge to Chu Mu of Qingfeng Courtyard. 3 days later, at this time, the sword fighting arena of the Sword Academy will determine the winner. If you don't dare to come, then get out of the Sword Academy, so as not to make a fool of yourself here. Yan Ming also took a step forward and stood side by side with Wang Kuei. His breath was fierce and his words were like a sharp sword. We have brought the message. As for whether you want to pass it on to Chu Mu, that's your business. Whether Chu Mu comes or not is his own business. But all of you need to know that if you don't come when the time comes, then there's no need to stay in the academy. Scram out of the academy with your tails between your legs and never set foot here again. Wang Kuei said sternly again. His tone was full of threats. Then, without giving Chu Mu and Yuan Wenhua any chance to refute, he quickly turned around with Yanming and used his movement technique to leave. Yuan Wenhua was stunned for a moment and then said angrily, Junior brother, these two guys are too annoying. All right, let's go in first. Compared to Yuan Wenhua's anger, Chu Mu's face was calm. He thought for a moment and saw through the other's plan. They were worried that he wouldn't dare to go to the battle arena, so they created all kinds of pressure to force him to go. A cold smile flashed across Chu Mu's eyes. I was just thinking about how to deal with you. I didn't expect that you would take the initiative to come to me. Very well. In 3 days, you will know how stupid you are. The two strode into Qingfeng Academy. Yuan Wenhua immediately gathered all the brothers in the hall and repeated what the two disciples of Qinglan Academy had just said. The senior brother of Qinglan Academy. After listening quietly, Luo Yufeng frowned slightly. The senior brother of Qinglan Academy is Wei Hong. However, this Wei Hong has left the academy before and returned to Qinglan Sword Sect. He even disguised himself as a 9th stage disciple and entered Qinglan Virtual Realm, but he did not come out. It seems that the so-called senior brother now should be Song Guangtao, who was originally ranked 2nd. Chu Mu and others were slightly stunned when they heard this. They did not expect that Wei Hong, who died under Chu Mu's sword, was actually the senior brother of Qinglan Academy. Senior brother, how is the strength of this Song Guangtao? Li Yi asked after pondering. Song Guangtao's strength is not as good as Wei Hong's, so he is ranked 2nd. However, this person is quite scheming and his talent is not bad. Since he is now respected as the senior brother of Qinglan Academy, his overall strength must have improved. He should not be weaker than Wei Hong. Luo Yufeng said slowly, his face a little dignified. Song Guangtao's overall strength is better than mine, and he likes to attack and even kill geniuses. In the past, when I was still in Qinglan Mountain, some of the more talented disciples of our sect and Qingshui Sword Sect were provoked and suppressed by him. I didn't expect that this time he planned to attack junior brother Chu. This damned Song Guangtao. Zhou Jin's face was angry. If it weren't for my lack of cultivation, I would go to the arena with him and see how arrogant he can be. Zhang Xiuran's face was indifferent, sitting in the chair without saying a word. However, if one looked carefully at his eyes, one would find that there was a cold flash in his eyes, containing a trace of anger. Compared with the three of them, Li Yi, Yuan Wenhua, Wang Tingo, and Xie Chunlei were much calmer. After all, they saw with their own eyes that Wei Hong was killed by Chu Mu. At that time, Chu Mu's cultivation was at the peak of 9th stage. Now, Chu Mu's cultivation had been promoted to the middle of 10th stage, and his swordsmanship seemed to have improved a lot. Song Guangtao was not as good as Wei Hong before. Now, even if he improved, at most he would be at the level of Wei Hong. At most, they believed that he was definitely not Chu Mu's opponent. They had 100% confidence in Chu Mu. Junior brother Chu, your talent is far above mine. Even eldest senior brother admires you. Therefore, you have a lot of room for growth. Zhou Jin looked at Chu Mu and said seriously, this Song Guangtao proposed a sword battle. He must have bad intentions. I know his goal very well. He must want to take advantage of the time when junior brother Chu hasn't matured yet to ruthlessly suppress junior brother Chu. Junior brother Chu will have a shadow in his heart and will be unable to achieve greater achievements. This kind of thinking is very vicious. Yes, second junior brother is right. With my understanding of Song Guangtao, he is completely capable of doing such a thing. Moreover, once you enter the sword battle arena, external forces will not be able to interfere. Victory and defeat can only be determined on the stage. Song Guangtao will definitely think of a way to trap you, junior brother Chu, so you won't be able to admit defeat, Luo Yufeng muttered with a solemn expression. That, junior brother Chu, should we tell eldest senior brother and the others? Wang Tingo looked at Chu Mu and asked hesitantly. What is it? Luo Yufeng and the other two were stunned. They looked curiously at Wang Tingo and then at Chu Mu. Their intuition told them that there was something important that they didn't know. Chu Mu didn't say anything. He faintly nodded his head. This sort of thing would be known sooner or later. Knowing now and knowing later, although there was a slight difference, they were all very close and united fellow disciples. It didn't matter. Eldest senior brother, second senior brother, third senior brother. The truth is that Wei Hong died in the Green Orchid virtual realm. With Chu Mu's permission, Wang Tingo began to speak. Luo Yufeng and the other two nodded. They already knew the truth. Could there be more behind the scenes? Thinking of this, their eyes couldn't help but light up. Wang Tingo continued. Actually, Wei Hong died under the sword of junior brother Chu. What? Luo Yufeng and the other two stood up abruptly. Their faces were filled with shock and disbelief. That's right. The four of us saw it. Junior brother Chu and Wei Hong had a life and death battle. In the end, junior brother Chu killed Wei Hong with his sword. At that time, junior brother Chu was only at the peak of stage 9. After killing Wei Hong, he didn't suffer any injuries. Wang Tingo said in an incomparably confident tone, full of pride. Li Yi and the others also nodded vigorously. Luo Yufeng and the other two were petrified. They stood there motionless with a blank face. After a long time, they turned their necks with difficulty and shifted their gaze to Chu Mu's face. With difficulty, they said, Junior brother Chu, this N. Chu Mu nodded his head, his face indifferent. Luo Yufeng and the other two were stunned for a long time before they finally reacted. For a moment, they couldn't tell what kind of excitement and emotion they felt. In short, their hearts were incomparably complicated. Their expressions were also very complicated. Junior brother Chu, little junior brother, you truly hid yourself well. Zhou Jin sighed with a complicated expression. Zhang Xiuran's face was uneasy. Thinking back to before, he still had to fight with Chu Mu. Even Luo Yufeng couldn't remain calm. We can't blame junior brother Chu. If such news were to spread out at that time, Qinglan sword sect would definitely be desperate. Li Yi opened his mouth and said, "But now there are only a few of us here, and we're in the Sword Academy, so there's not so much taboo." Fourth senior brother is right. This time, I'm afraid that Song Guangtao didn't expect that he wanted to ruthlessly suppress junior brother Chu, but he shot himself in the foot. Yuan Wenhua laughed with a face full of expectation. Luo Yufeng and the other two's eyes suddenly lit up. They clapped their hands and laughed. That's right. If Wei Hong was really killed by junior brother Chu, then Song Guangtao won't be junior brother Chu's opponent unless he reaches the half-step Qi transformation stage. In this way, he's really digging his own grave. I think that junior brother Chu was able to kill Wei Hong, who was at the peak of the 10th stage, when he was only at the peak of the 9th stage. Now that junior brother Chu is at the middle stage of the 10th stage, even if Song Guangtao reaches the half-step Qi transformation stage, junior brother Chu won't necessarily lose to him, Zhou Jin said in high spirits. Well, about this news, no one should spread it out. Since Song Guangtao is digging his own grave, then after 3 days, junior brother Chu will give him a ruthless blow. Luo Yufeng lowered his voice as if he was worried that the walls might be eavesdropping. Now, let's have a good discussion about how to cause more damage to Song Guangtao and the people of Qinglan Academy in the sword fight 3 days later. I like this. Soon, Yan Ming and Wang Kuei spread the news of the decisive battle between Chu Mu of Qingfeng School and Song Guangtao of Qinglan School in the afternoon, 3 days later. Moreover, their respective cultivations were also announced. Liz Ho's Sword Academy was not big, but it was not small either, especially under the deliberate efforts of some people. Soon, the people of the 48 courtyards heard the news. In this regard, different people had different reactions. The disciples of the same low-grade sword sect were very interested. Although there would be decisive battles between disciples of different courtyards from time to time in the Sword Academy, it was rare to see a decisive battle with such a huge gap in cultivation. As for the disciples of the middle-grade sword sects, some had looks of disdain, some did not care, and some showed some interest. Among them, Chu Tian and Chu Hong from the Flowing Cloud Sword Sect and the 100 Flower Sword Sect had almost the same expression. Their faces were filled with astonishment and surprise, and at the same time they were somewhat worried. Without saying a word, they directly set off for the Qingfeng courtyard. In addition, there were several other people who had been involved with Chu Mu before. After hearing about it, they gloated. As for the 3 high-grade sword sects, they showed little interest. The strength of the high-grade sword sects was much stronger than that of the low-grade sword sections. The decisive battle between a swordsman at the peak of the 10th phase and a swordsman at the middle of the 10th phase did not arouse their interest. However, there was some movement in the courtyard of the prefectural air. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation.